Split brain theory comes from a series of studies involving patients who had undergone a specific brain surgery. These patients had their corpus callosum severed. The corpus callosum is a thick bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. This procedure was originally performed to help people with severe epilepsy. The goal was to stop seizures from spreading from one side of the brain to the other. What followed, however, offered unexpected insights into how the brain processes information and how it explains behavior. Michael Gazzaniga and Roger Sperry were the main scientists behind the early research on split brain patients. They ran a number of tests to see how each hemisphere of the brain reacted when it was isolated from the other. The findings were strange, but telling. In right-handed people, the left hemisphere is usually dominant for language. That means speech, grammar, and most verbal understanding are controlled by that side. The right hemisphere, while not mute, typically has limited language ability. It is more specialized in spatial awareness, visual recognition, and emotion. In one of the well-known experiments, a patient was shown two different images, one to each visual field. Because of how the brain is wired, the left visual field sends information to the right hemisphere, and the right visual field sends it to the left hemisphere. When a patient was shown an image of a snow scene to the left visual field and a chicken claw to the right visual field, each hemisphere saw only one image. When asked to choose related objects from a group of pictures, the patient pointed to a shovel with the left hand and a chicken with the right hand. The left hand is controlled by the right hemisphere, which had seen the snow scene, while the right hand is controlled by the left hemisphere, which had seen the chicken claw. But the twist came when the patient was asked why he chose a shovel. Only the left hemisphere can speak, and it had not seen the snow scene. Yet the patient said, "The chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed." This explanation was clearly false, but the patient seemed unaware of the real reason for choosing the shovel. He did not say, "I don't know," or "I can't explain that." Instead, the brain filled in the gap with a story that seemed to make sense. This is what Gazzaniga called the interpreter function of the left hemisphere. It tries to make sense of actions, even when the reasoning is fabricated. The left brain does not like gaps in meaning. It is always trying to explain, even when it does not have access to all the facts. In split brain patients, the left hemisphere often acts as if it knows more than it does. It generates stories to explain the actions of the body that it cannot fully control. These actions are sometimes guided by the right hemisphere, which is cut off from the speech center. The left brain does not stop and question the logic. It simply tries to connect dots that may not be connected. Consider another example. In one test, a command like "walk" was flashed to the right hemisphere. The patient stood up and walked out of the room. When asked why they did that, the patient said something like, "I needed to get a soda." Again, the response was not "I don't know" or "I was told to." The left hemisphere made up an explanation based on the available context. It wasn't lying in the usual sense. It was filling in a blank space with something that fit the narrative. This feature of the brain, to construct explanations when none are available, is not limited to split brain patients. It happens all the time in people with fully intact brains. We often act first and then justify our actions later. For example, someone might buy an expensive item on impulse and then explain the purchase by saying it was a good investment or that it was necessary. In truth, the purchase might have been driven by emotion, habit, or subconscious factors, but the brain quickly constructs a story to make the action seem rational. This raises questions about how much control we actually have over our decisions. If the brain is wired to explain first and ask questions later, how reliable are our thoughts about why we do what we do? Gazzaniga's work suggests that the left brain acts as a press secretary. It speaks on behalf of the whole system, even when it does not have access to all departments. It gives answers with confidence, whether they are accurate or not. In psychological terms, this relates to the concept of confabulation. Confabulation happens when people recall things that did not happen or fill in missing details with false memories. It is common in certain brain injuries and memory disorders. But the idea of everyday confabulation, normal people making up reasons for their own actions without knowing it, extends the implications of split brain research into daily life. The interpreter function also affects how we understand others. We often guess what people are thinking or feeling based on partial information. Then we explain their actions with assumptions that feel true but may be false. This can lead to misunderstandings or false confidence in our judgments. It is the same pattern seen in split brain patients, but on the social scale. Split brain theory challenges the idea of a single, unified self. It suggests that the mind is more like a system of parts working together, sometimes in conflict. The self, in this view, is not a fixed core, but a shifting pattern created by multiple brain processes. The interpreter, in the left hemisphere, helps bind those processes together into a story, a narrative that gives us a sense of continuity. But it's a constructed story, not necessarily a true one. What Gazzaniga uncovered is not just a rare medical condition, it's a window into how all brains work. We are storytellers by design. We need cause and effect. We want reasons. Even if they are wrong, this desire to explain may be one of the core traits that define human consciousness. Yet, it also means we must be cautious about trusting our own explanations too quickly. What feels like a reason might just be a convenient fiction. The framing effect shows how our decisions change depending on how a choice is presented, even if the facts stay the same. This idea comes from behavioral economics and psychology. It tells us that people are not always rational thinkers. How a question is asked or how a situation is described can strongly influence what we choose. It does not matter if the core data does not change. What matters is how that data is framed. This creates a gap between what we know and what we decide. One of the most famous experiments that shows the framing effect comes from psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. They asked people to imagine a deadly disease that could kill 600 people. Two different options for treatment were presented. In one version, option A said 200 people would be saved. Option B had a 1/3 chance that all 600 would be saved, and a 2/3 chance that no one would be saved. Most people picked option A, the sure thing. But in the second version, the options were worded differently. Option A now said 400 people would die, while option B stayed the same. Here, most people picked option B, the gamble. The outcomes were the same. Saving 200 means 400 die, and the risky option stayed identical. But changing the wording from saved to die flipped the preference. This experiment shows how people respond differently to gains and losses. When the frame uses positive language, like saving lives, people tend to avoid risk. When it uses negative language, like people dying, people are more willing to take a chance. This pattern is tied to something called loss aversion. We feel the pain of a loss more deeply than the pleasure of a gain. The framing effect taps into this emotion. This kind of framing happens in real life every day. Think about food labels. A yogurt container that says 90% fat-free seems healthier than one that says contains 10% fat. But they are the same. People are more likely to buy the one that sounds positive. The same applies in marketing. A store might say a jacket is on sale, save 20%, instead of was $100, now $80. Both are accurate, but one feels like a gain, and the other just feels like math. The emotional response is what matters, not just the logic. Framing also plays a large role in politics and media. A politician may describe a military action as a peacekeeping mission, instead of an invasion. The public reacts differently based on these words. News headlines can frame the same event in a positive or negative light, depending on the goals of the outlet. For example, an unemployment rate of 4% could be framed as 96% of people have jobs, or 4% of people can't find work. The fact does not change, but the reaction does. In medicine, the framing effect can influence what treatment people accept. If a doctor tells a patient that a surgery has a 90% survival rate, the patient is likely to agree to it. If instead the doctor says there is a 10% chance of death, the same patient might say no. That difference in wording can mean the difference between life and death. Even experienced professionals are not fully immune to this effect. Another example is insurance. People are more likely to buy travel insurance that covers death due to terrorism than one that covers death due to any cause. That makes no sense logically. The second policy includes the first, but the specific mention of terrorism draws attention to fear and risk. It changes the frame from general safety to a specific threat. The emotional reaction leads the decision. In law, attorneys frame stories to sway juries. A defense lawyer might frame an act as a mistake, while a prosecutor calls it a deliberate crime. The details may stay the same, but the emotional response shifts. Jury decisions can turn on these subtle choices in wording. Judges are trained to avoid bias, but jurors are ordinary people. They respond to how a story feels as much as to the facts it contains. In everyday life, the framing effect shows up when we describe situations to others or even to ourselves. A student might say, "I only got 70%, or "I passed with a B." Both are true, but one sounds like a failure and the other like a success. A person might describe a job loss as being fired or a chance to start something new. The frame shapes the mindset, and mindset influences behavior. This effect also plays out in group decision-making. In a meeting, a team might reject a project that is described as having a 25% chance of failure, but accept one described as having a 75% chance of success. Groupthink can amplify the framing effect because people tend to follow the tone that has been set, especially when the stakes are high and time is short. Leaders who understand this can steer group outcomes not by changing facts, but by choosing how to present them. Framing can be used deliberately to influence behavior, but it can also happen without planning. Sometimes people frame things based on habit, emotion, or culture. For example, how someone describes a rainy day. "It's gloomy," or "the plants needed this," shows a frame. That frame can affect mood, motivation, and even physical health. It is important to understand that the framing effect does not just show irrationality. It shows how human thinking relies on context. Words matter. Tone matters. The same information, delivered with a different spin, feels different. That feeling drives action more than we like to admit. Recognizing the framing effect in your own choices is hard because it often works below awareness. But slowing down and asking, "Is this the only way to look at this?" can help. Asking for the reverse frame can offer a check. If a decision sounds bad when flipped, like going from 90% success to 10% failure, then the framing might be leading the decision more than the substance. The framing effect does not mean people are weak thinkers. It means thinking is not just about logic. It is about language, emotion, and structure. Understanding this can improve communication, reduce bias, and help make more consistent decisions. Even when the numbers stay the same, the way they are wrapped changes everything. Learned helplessness is a condition in which someone stops trying to change a bad situation after repeatedly failing to escape it in the past. This term was introduced by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s. His early experiments with dogs helped him notice a powerful pattern. When living things face failure again and again, They begin to believe that no matter what they do, the outcome will be the same, even when the situation improves. And change becomes possible, they do not try. They assume failure is fixed and unchangeable. Seligman's original experiment was simple but revealing. He placed dogs in a box where they would receive mild electric shocks. At first, one group of dogs could stop the shock by pressing a panel with their noses. Another group, however, received shocks no matter what they did. These dogs had no control over the outcome. After repeated exposure, they stopped trying. Later, when the dogs were moved to a new box where escape was easy, just jump over a small barrier, they did nothing. They stayed still and endured the shock. They had learned that their actions had no effect, so they gave up even when the rules had changed. This reaction wasn't caused by laziness or weakness. It was a psychological shift. The dogs had come to expect that no action would change their situation. They had developed what Seligman called learned helplessness. It was a learned expectation based on experience that effort is useless. The same effect happens in humans. A child who struggles with math may keep failing tests despite trying. Over time, they never stop studying. Even when the school changes the teaching method or offers support, the child no longer believes they can succeed. A job seeker who faces constant rejection might stop applying altogether. A person in an abusive relationship may come to believe they have no way out, even when help becomes available. Learned helplessness is not simply giving up. It is a deeper psychological state where the brain begins to believe that effort and outcome are no longer linked. This belief affects motivation, attention, and even physical health. People may develop symptoms of depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. They avoid effort, not because they don't care, but because they have come to expect that effort does not work. This condition can show up in schools, workplaces, relationships, and social systems. In education, students from under-resourced communities may feel helpless if they see others succeed while they constantly fall behind, even when trying. If support is missing for long enough, effort fades. In the workplace, an employee who suggests ideas that are always ignored may stop contributing. They may become silent, disengaged, or quietly quit. In relationships, if someone is repeatedly criticized or dismissed, they may stop expressing their needs altogether. The key feature of learned helplessness is that the belief is no longer tied to the present. It is built from the past and then carried forward. Even if the situation changes, the belief remains. This makes it hard to reverse. Encouragement alone often does not work because the person has lost faith in cause and effect. They might say, "What's the point?" or "It won't work anyway." These are not excuses. They are the voice of experience shaped by failure. Research also shows that the effect depends on how people explain their failures. Seligman later studied explanatory styles, how people explain bad events to themselves. Those with a pessimistic style see failure as permanent, personal, and widespread. They believe it's always going to be this way. It's their fault, and it affects everything. People with an optimistic style see failure as temporary, specific, and external. They believe things can improve, it was due to a specific reason, and it doesn't define them. These styles shape whether a person falls into learned helplessness or stays resilient. There are ways to break this cycle, but they require more than positive thinking. The brain needs proof that actions can produce real change. This is called mastery experience. When people have small wins, clear results from their own actions, they begin to rebuild belief in control. This is why recovery often starts with small tasks. Success must be seen and felt. It can't just be told. Therapists use cognitive behavioral therapy to address learned helplessness. This approach helps people challenge their negative beliefs and test them against real evidence. If someone believes they can't do anything right, therapy may involve trying small tasks and recording the results. Over time, success breaks the old pattern and builds a new one. Support from others also matters. Encouragement only works if it comes with real change. Saying "try harder" does not help someone who feels helpless. What helps is making sure that effort leads to outcome. This might mean adjusting the task, reducing obstacles, or giving more time. The goal is to show the person that their actions matter again. Learned helplessness is not a personal failure. It is a psychological response to repeated defeat. It develops in people of all ages and backgrounds. It can happen in a school child or in a high-level executive. What matters is not who the person is, but how often they have faced situations where trying made no difference. The human brain, like the dogs in Seligman's experiment, adapts to patterns. When failure becomes predictable, the brain stops preparing for success. This pattern can even appear at the group or societal level. Communities that have faced long-term poverty, discrimination, or neglect may develop collective helplessness. Generations may grow up believing that nothing they do will change their future. This is not apathy. It is experience turned into belief. Changing it takes time, investment, and a steady pattern of effort followed by result. Seligman's theory shifted how people understood depression and motivation. It offered a clear, evidence-based view of why people stop trying, even when they should keep going. It showed that behavior is not only driven by desire or willpower, it is shaped by the link between action and result. Break that link often enough, and even the strongest drive fades. Build that link again, and hope can return. The sunk cost fallacy happens when someone continues with a project, decision, or relationship only because they have already spent time, money, or effort on it, even when the situation is clearly no longer beneficial. The problem is that people treat past investments as reasons to keep going, even though those costs are already gone and cannot be recovered. In logic and economics, these costs are called sunk because they are spent, no matter what choice is made going forward. The rational decision would be to ignore sunk costs and focus only on future outcomes. But human thinking does not always work that way. This fallacy shows up in many parts of life. Imagine someone buys a ticket to a movie. After 30 minutes, they realize the movie is terrible. Still, they stay until the end. They tell themselves they want to get their money's worth, even though the money is already gone. The better choice might have been to leave and use that time for something else. But leaving feels like waste, even though staying does not undo the cost. This same logic applies to larger decisions. A person may stay in a college major they dislike because they've already completed 2 years. A business may continue funding a failing product because of the millions already spent in development. A couple may stay in an unhappy relationship because of the years they've invested. In each case, the past investment creates pressure to continue, even when the current situation calls for a change. The sunk cost fallacy is tied to loss aversion. People do not like to admit a loss. Quitting or changing feels like failure. So instead, they keep going in hopes of turning the situation around, or at least not making it feel like a waste. But this thinking ignores a basic principle: the past is fixed. Only future costs and benefits should guide decisions. Sticking with a bad plan doesn't recover the task. It only adds to the loss. Economists use a simple idea to describe rational decision-making. Ignore sunk costs and think only about marginal cost and marginal benefit. Marginal cost is what you will spend from this point on. Marginal benefit is what you expect to gain. If the future costs are higher than the benefits, you should stop, no matter what has already been spent. This is how a company would decide whether to keep a product on the market or cancel it. But humans are not machines. Emotions play a major role in decision-making. Pride, guilt, hope, and fear all influence how we think. The more someone has sacrificed, the harder it becomes to walk away. there is also a need for consistency. People want their actions to make sense in a larger story. They want to believe they were right to start something. Admitting that something no longer works can feel like admitting they were wrong from the beginning. There's also the issue of public pressure. When a project is visible, the decision to stop may seem like failure to others. A government might keep building a bridge to nowhere just to avoid backlash. A CEO may continue funding a failing campaign so the shareholders do not lose faith. The need to save face can lead to more waste. The Concorde jet project is often cited as a real-world example of the sunk cost fallacy. In the 1960s and 1970s, Britain and France worked together to create a supersonic passenger jet. The project ran over budget and had limited demand, but both governments kept pouring money into it. They had already spent so much that stopping felt impossible. In the end, the Concorde flew for years, but never turned a profit. It became a symbol of sunk cost thinking, where national pride and past spending outweighed clear financial logic. This fallacy can affect personal life in quiet ways. Someone might keep reading a long book they don't enjoy because they've already read 300 pages. They might keep a subscription they never use just because they paid for the year. They may even stay in a toxic friendship out of loyalty, not because the relationship brings any value. In these moments, the past seems to demand repayment, but what's really needed is a fresh look at the future. One way to break free from sunk cost thinking is to ask, if I had not already invested anything, would I choose this again? This question shifts focus from what's been spent to what lies ahead. If the answer is no, then it's time to consider changing course. Another method is to set clear decision checkpoints ahead of time. For example, a team might agree to stop a project if it fails to meet certain goals by a set date. This helps prevent emotional attachment from taking over. It's also useful to imagine the investment as belonging to someone else. People often give better advice to others than they give to themselves. If a friend told you they were staying in a bad job just because they had been there for 5 years, you might say, that's not a reason to stay. But it's harder to see clearly when you are the one facing the loss. In business, some companies try to reduce sunk cost bias by using outside consultants to give fresh evaluations. Others use anonymous voting among team members to reduce pressure. The idea is to create space for honest decisions without the emotional weight of past investment. Even highly trained professionals fall for the sunk cost fallacy. Doctors may continue with treatments that aren't working because they've already started the protocol. Military leaders may press on with failing strategies because of lives already lost. The logic is always the same. We've come too far to stop now, but stopping at the wrong time adds more harm, not less. Recognizing sunk cost thinking does not mean avoiding commitment. It means being flexible. It means knowing the difference between persistence and waste. Holding on is not always the strong choice. Sometimes the strongest choice is to let go. Letting go of sunk costs is not giving up. It is choosing to stop digging when the hole is already deep. The money, time, or energy spent cannot be recovered. What matters now is whether more spending makes sense. That judgment must be made with clear eyes and steady hands. The past got you here. The future is still open. The Dunning-Kruger Effect describes a pattern where people with low ability or knowledge in a specific area tend to overestimate their competence. At the same time, people with high ability often underestimate their competence. This idea was named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who studied this behavior in the late 1990s. They found that the same lack of skill that causes poor performance also blocks people from seeing their own shortcomings. The original research involved giving participants tests on logic, grammar, and humor. After taking the tests, the participants were asked to estimate how well they had done. The results showed that those who performed worst consistently gave themselves high scores. some rated themselves as being well above average, even though they were near the bottom. In contrast, the people who did well often rated themselves lower than their actual performance. They assumed the tasks were easy for everyone, not just for them. This effect happens because knowledge and skill are needed not only to complete a task, but also to judge how well the task was done. If someone lacks the basics of a subject, they also lack the ability to recognize their mistakes. They cannot see the gap between what they know and what they don't. The result is misplaced confidence. They believe they understand a subject when they have only a surface-level view. A common example is seen in first-year students of a subject. After a few lectures, someone might say they know everything about psychology or economics. They've learned a few key terms, maybe read a few articles, and now feel like experts. But as they go deeper into the subject, they start to notice how much they don't know. Their confidence drops before it builds back up again. This is sometimes shown as a curve. Confidence starts high, dips with experience, and then slowly rises again as real expertise grows. This pattern shows up in many areas. A person who just learned basic photography might feel ready to shoot a wedding. Someone who read an article about investing might think they can beat the stock market. A beginner coder might try to build an app with features they barely understand. These people are not pretending. They truly believe they are capable. Their lack of skill hides their own limits. At the same time, experts tend to underestimate themselves. This happens because as someone learns more, they also learn what they don't know. They begin to see the complexity of the subject. They know where the limits of their knowledge are. They also assume others know the same things they do. This is called the curse of knowledge. It leads them to think they are average when they are not. This effect can have real-world consequences. In the workplace, someone with little knowledge may push strong opinions in meetings, ignoring feedback from more experienced colleagues. In public debate, a confident speaker with poor facts may seem more convincing than a cautious expert who speaks carefully. On social media, people often comment with certainty on topics they've barely studied. Their confidence draws attention, even when their ideas are wrong. Meanwhile, experts who understand the nuances may hesitate to speak, knowing the limits of what they can claim. The Dunning-Kruger Effect can also affect decision-making. A manager may trust the loudest voice in the room, not the most informed one. A voter may support a policy based on simple slogans rather than detailed analysis. A patient may choose health advice from a confident influencer rather than a trained doctor. In all these cases, overconfidence based on low skill creates risks. This does not mean that beginners should stay silent or that confidence is always bad. Confidence helps people try new things and grow. But when confidence is based on ignorance, it becomes dangerous. It leads to poor decisions and prevents learning. If someone thinks they already know enough, they stop asking questions. There are ways to reduce the effect. One is to stay aware of how complex a subject really is. If something seems simple, ask whether there might be more to it. Seek out feedback from people with more experience. Be willing to adjust your views. Avoid assuming that strong opinions mean strong understanding. Confidence and competence do not always match. Another way to reduce this effect is through education that includes self-assessment. When people learn how to evaluate their own work, they become better at spotting mistakes. Training in critical thinking and problem-solving also helps. These skills allow people to check their own logic and spot gaps in their knowledge. People in leadership roles should also be aware of this bias. When evaluating team input, they should ask for evidence, not just confidence. They should create environments where quiet expertise is valued as much as loud opinions. That helps avoid poor choices based on who speaks the most, rather than who knows the most. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not a flaw unique to some people. Everyone is vulnerable to it in areas where they are new or less experienced. Even experts can fall into it when they move into a new field. The key is to recognize that feeling confident does not always mean being correct, and feeling unsure does not always mean being wrong. Understanding this effect helps create better conversations, better decisions, and better self-awareness. It reminds us to stay humble when learning something new and to stay open when we think we already know enough. It also reminds us that real skill often comes with quiet confidence, not loud certainty. The more someone knows, the more they tend to see the full picture, including the parts that are still unclear. And that kind of awareness, while less flashy, is often the sign of true understanding. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut we use when making decisions or judgments. Instead of carefully analyzing all the data, we often rely on what comes to mind quickly and easily. The more vivid or recent the memory, the more likely we are to assume that the event it represents is common or likely to happen again. This method helps the brain save time, but it often leads to errors in thinking. This shortcut can be useful. If you hear thunder and see dark clouds, you may decide to take an umbrella. That's a fast, helpful decision. But the availability heuristic becomes a problem when it leads us to overestimate the frequency or risk of dramatic but rare events. If we recently saw a news story about a plane crash, we might feel that flying is very dangerous, even though the data shows it is much safer than driving. The story sticks in our memory, so we believe the event is more common than it actually is. The ease of recall drives the availability heuristic. Our brains are not counting events carefully. They are asking a simple question: can I think of an example? If the answer is yes, and the example is clear or emotional, we rate the event as more likely or more important. The more easily we recall something, the more we let it guide our decision, even when that memory is not a good guide. One of the best-known examples of the availability heuristic involves people's fear of shark attacks. Stories about shark attacks are dramatic and often covered in the media. Because of this, many people fear swimming in the ocean, but actual shark attacks are extremely rare. The chance of being attacked by a shark is much lower than the chance of drowning or being injured in a car accident on the way to the beach. But stories of car accidents are common and dull. Stories of sharks are unusual and emotional. The mind favors the memorable story over the quiet fact. The media plays a major role in shaping what people find available in their memory. News coverage tends to focus on rare, shocking, or emotional events: plane crashes, terrorist attacks, child abductions. Because these stories are told often and with strong detail, they stick in the mind. As a result, people may come to believe these events happen more often than they do. Meanwhile, common but less dramatic events like heart disease or diabetes get less attention, even though they are far more likely to affect someone's life. This mismatch between real risk and perceived risk can affect how people spend money, vote, or make health choices. Advertising also uses the availability heuristic. If an ad shows someone winning the lottery or getting rich quickly, the image can stick. Even if the chance of that outcome is tiny, it feels closer just because we saw it. This can lead people to overestimate their odds and make poor financial decisions. The same thing happens with testimonials. If we hear one strong story of someone cured by a treatment, that single case may feel more convincing than statistics showing it rarely works. One vivid example can outweigh dozens of dull facts. Social experiences also shape the availability heuristic. If someone lives in a neighborhood with frequent crime, they may believe that crime is rising everywhere. If someone has a friend who got laid off, they may worry that the whole economy is collapsing. These are not unreasonable reactions, but they may not reflect the full picture. Local experience feels bigger than distant data, and if an event happens close to us or to someone we know, it becomes far more available in memory. This bias also shows up in personal relationships. If you remember a few arguments with a friend or partner more clearly than many calm moments, you may think the relationship is worse than it is. The mind tends to highlight emotional moments. That means negative memories can take up more space, even if they are rare. This can lead to unfair judgments and broken trust. The availability heuristic also affects how we judge ourselves. If we can quickly think of times we failed or made mistakes, we may believe we are incompetent. If we easily recall compliments or successes, we may feel more confident. Neither feeling may match reality. It depends on what memories rise to the surface first. That's why mood and memory are so closely linked. One way to test whether you are falling for the availability heuristic is to ask, is this memory a good sample of how things usually go, or is it just a strong one? If something comes to mind quickly, stop and consider how often it really happens. Try to separate the feeling of ease from the reality of frequency. Just because something is easy to recall doesn't mean it's common or important. Researchers have shown how this works in experiments. In one study, people were asked to recall either 6 times they had acted assertively or 12 times. Strangely, people who recalled 6 examples rated themselves as more assertive than those who recalled 12. That's because recalling 12 examples was harder, and the difficulty made them feel less sure of themselves. The ease of recall, not the actual behavior, shaped their judgment. This finding highlights a key feature of the availability heuristic. It depends more on how easily something comes to mind than on how much it happened. That means it can be manipulated. If someone wants to influence your view, they only need to make a few strong examples available to you. That's why stories, images, and emotional events are so powerful in politics, advertising, and social media. They don't need to be common. They just need to be easy to remember. In decision-making, the availability heuristic leads to shortcuts that can help or harm. It helps us respond fast in some cases, but it often steers us away from careful thinking. It explains why people buy lottery tickets, fear flying, worry about crime, or chase get-rich schemes. It also explains why people fail to prepare for real risks like poor diet, climate change, or chronic illness, because these risks are slow, dull, and hard to picture. The challenge is not to stop using mental shortcuts. That's how the brain works. The challenge is to notice when the shortcut leads to false conclusions. Slowing down, seeking more examples, and checking actual data can help reduce the effect. So can asking others for their views, especially when their experiences differ from your own. Different memories mean different judgments. Seeing those differences makes it easier to tell the difference between what is real and what just feels real. Cognitive load theory explains how the brain handles information when learning or solving problems. It focuses on the limits of working memory, which is the part of the brain that holds information for short periods while we use it. This part of memory can only hold a small number of items at once, usually around 4 to 7. When too much information is presented at once, working memory becomes overloaded. When that happens, thinking becomes harder, and learning slows down or breaks down entirely. The theory was developed by educational psychologist John Sweller in the late 1980s. He noticed that some learning tasks were harder not because the content was difficult, but because they overloaded the learner's mental capacity. When the mind is flooded with too much input, words, diagrams, instructions, background noise, it has to use more energy just to keep track of what's happening. This leaves less space for actual thinking or understanding. There are 3 types of cognitive load: intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. Intrinsic load is built into the task itself. Some topics are naturally complex. For example, solving a math equation requires holding steps in mind, understanding symbols, and applying rules. That creates a mental load that cannot be removed, but it can be managed. Extraneous load comes from how information is presented. Poor explanations, cluttered slides, or confusing instructions add to the burden on the brain. This kind of load can be reduced by improving how material is delivered. Germane load is the effort spent on building and organizing knowledge in a useful way. This kind of load helps learning as it supports the brain in forming strong mental connections. A simple example shows how cognitive load works. Imagine learning how to drive a car. At first, every task, steering, braking, using mirrors, checking signs, feels like a separate challenge. The brain is busy keeping track of each part. If someone tried to explain traffic law in detail while you were learning to park, it would likely confuse you. The brain would be managing too much at once. That's high cognitive load. But after practice, some tasks become automatic. You don't think about shifting gears or checking mirrors. That frees space in your working memory to handle new problems, like reading road signs or reacting to sudden changes. This shift from high to manageable load is how learning progresses. In classrooms, cognitive load can make or break how well students learn. If a teacher presents too much information at once or uses long, complicated sentences, students may tune out or forget what was just said. Their minds can't hold on to all the information at the same time. The same happens with textbooks filled with jargon or charts that are not explained. The learner wastes mental energy trying to understand the presentation, not the concept itself. This is extraneous load, and it adds unnecessary strain. Teachers can reduce cognitive load by breaking material into smaller chunks. This is called chunking. For example, a list of 10 vocabulary words is easier to learn when grouped into categories of 3 or 4. Another method is using worked examples, problems that are already solved, with each step shown clearly. This lets the learner focus on understanding how the steps fit together, instead of trying to solve and understand at the same time. Visuals can help or hurt, depending on how they are used. A well-designed diagram can reduce cognitive load by showing complex ideas clearly. But if a slide is full of labels, arrows, and small text, it adds extraneous load. The learner's brain must switch back and forth between text and image, which slows understanding. This is called the split attention effect. One solution is to place related text next to the part of the image it explains, reducing the need to shift focus. Cognitive load also affects decision-making. In everyday life, we often make worse choices when our minds are busy. For example, trying to make an important financial decision while also answering texts and emails will likely lead to mistakes. The brain can't focus deeply on multiple tasks at once. This is why multitasking often leads to poor outcomes. Each task demands a portion of working memory, and together they overload the system. Even emotions can increase cognitive load. Stress, anxiety, and fear take up space in working memory. When someone is anxious before a test, they use part of their mental energy just managing their emotions. That leaves less capacity for recalling facts or solving problems. The same happens in high-stakes job interviews or public speaking. The emotional load crowds the thinking space. Cognitive load also plays a role in technology design. Websites, apps, and tools work best when they are simple and clear. If a user opens an app and sees 10 different buttons, flashing banners, and pop-up alerts, they may get confused or frustrated. The interface creates high extraneous load. Good design reduces this by guiding the user step by step and only showing what is needed at each moment. This is why some websites feel easy to use. They match the brain's processing limits. In training environments, managing cognitive load is essential. Military, medical, and aviation training all rely on step-by-step instruction and repeated practice. In a crisis, the brain must work fast with limited resources. Training builds automatic responses that free up working memory for new problems. A firefighter doesn't need to think about how to use a hose during a fire. That knowledge is stored in long-term memory. The brain can focus on reading the situation and deciding what to do next. As people gain experience, cognitive load becomes easier to manage. The brain shifts knowledge from working memory to long-term memory. These stored patterns, called schemas, let us handle complex tasks with ease. For example, a chess master sees a board and immediately understands possible moves and threats. A beginner sees random pieces. The expert's schema reduces the load by grouping information in a meaningful way. The challenge is that many learning and work environments do not take cognitive load into account. They assume that more information is better. But when too much is delivered at once, the opposite happens. The brain becomes overwhelmed. Performance drops. Understanding fades. This is not a sign of low ability. It is the result of a system designed without respect for mental limits. By understanding cognitive load, we can design better learning, better tools, and better systems. The goal is not to remove all effort, but to direct mental energy to the right place. This means removing distractions, reducing clutter, and structuring tasks in a way that fits the brain's natural limits. When working memory is protected and supported, clear thinking and deep learning become possible. A nocebo effect happens when a person's negative expectations lead to real symptoms or health problems, even though there is no direct physical cause. It is the opposite of the placebo effect, where positive beliefs improve health. With a nocebo, the belief that something will cause harm is enough to create pain, sickness, or other issues. This effect shows how deeply the mind and body are connected. The brain does not just respond to what is real, it also reacts to what it believes is real. Researchers began studying the nocebo effect in drug trials. In these trials, patients were given sugar pills with no active ingredients. They were told that the pill might cause side effects such as nausea, headaches, or dizziness. Even though the pill had no power, many patients still reported those symptoms. They felt sick because they expected to feel sick. Their belief triggered a real reaction. This effect is not imagined or fake. The symptoms caused by nocebo beliefs are real. Brain scans show changes in brain activity and stress hormones in people who expect pain or illness. The body responds as if a threat is present, even if there is none. For example, if someone believes a harmless smell is toxic, they might develop breathing problems, skin irritation, or panic symptoms. The smell did nothing, but the belief did. One well-known study involved people who believed they were sensitive to electromagnetic fields from cell phones or Wi-Fi. When researchers told them they were being exposed, even when they were not, many developed headaches, nausea, and confusion. These symptoms were not faked. The brain triggered them based on expectation alone. The nocebo effect shows up often in medical settings. If a doctor gives too much focus to possible side effects, patients are more likely to develop them. If someone reads a long list of possible problems on a drug label, they may start to feel those problems, even if they are taking a low dose or a placebo. This happens because the brain is always scanning for danger. When a suggestion plants the idea of harm, the brain prepares for it and sometimes creates it. This effect can even influence chronic pain. If someone has back pain and hears from a doctor that their spine is badly damaged, their pain may increase. But if another doctor describes the same condition as mild and treatable, pain might decrease. The injury did not change, the belief about it did. Language matters, tone matters. The way a problem is described shapes how the brain reacts. In some cultures, the nocebo effect can be very strong. A person who believes they have been cursed or hexed may develop severe symptoms, including vomiting, weakness, or paralysis. These responses are not caused by any physical substance. They are caused by belief, often shared by the people around them. In such cases, the body's stress systems react as if under attack. Cortisol levels rise, heart rate speeds up, and the immune system changes. These are the body's defense tools, but they can become harmful when activated by fear alone. Fear is a strong driver of the nocebo effect. When someone hears a diagnosis, watches a news story about a new illness, or reads a health warning online, that information can trigger a fear-based response. If the fear is strong and focused, it can cause symptoms that match the warning. This is not due to weakness or overreaction. It is a normal response to perceived danger, but it shows how belief can turn harmless things into threats. The nocebo effect also appears in everyday life. If you eat food you believe is spoiled, you may feel sick, even if the food was fine. If someone tells you the air in a room is unsafe, you might develop a cough, headache, or fatigue within minutes. The cause is not the food or the air. It is the belief that they are harmful. Once the brain decides there is danger, it sends out signals to prepare the body. Those signals can create real symptoms. Doctors and researchers face a challenge when dealing with the nocebo effect. They must give people the information they need about side effects and risks, but they must also avoid planting fear that makes those effects more likely. Striking this balance takes skill. The way information is delivered, calmly, clearly, and without alarm, can reduce the risk of nocebo responses. Studies also show that people who are more anxious or sensitive to bodily signals are more likely to experience nocebo effects. These individuals often notice every small change in their body and may assume that something is wrong. If they take a new medicine or hear about a new illness, their minds may quickly create a link between what they feel and what they fear. This can lead to a cycle of growing symptoms and growing worry. The more they focus on a symptom, the stronger it becomes. One real-world example involved statins, a drug used to lower cholesterol. Some patients stopped taking the drug because of muscle pain they believed it caused. But in tests where patients didn't know if they were getting the drug or a placebo, those who expected side effects were more likely to report pain, no matter what they actually took. Their belief shaped their outcome. The nocebo effect also affects how people recover from illness. If someone expects a long, painful recovery, they may heal more slowly. If they believe their condition is hopeless, they may stop trying to get better. This mindset affects behavior, choices, and even how the immune system responds. Negative belief becomes a self-fulfilling outcome. Hope is not just an emotional state, it's a biological force. It is important to note that the nocebo effect is not under conscious control. People do not choose to feel worse. They are not faking. Their symptoms come from real brain and body processes. The danger lies in how easily those processes can be triggered by words, warnings, or past experiences. Once the brain believes harm is likely, it sets off a chain reaction that can lead to real suffering. One way to reduce the nocebo effect is to build trust and give information in a balanced way. If someone knows the possible side effects of a treatment, but also understands the benefits and the low chance of harm, they may feel more at ease. That sense of safety can prevent their brain from turning fear into symptoms. Mindset matters, not because it replaces medicine, but because it shapes how medicine works. People can also help themselves by being aware of how expectation shapes experience. When symptoms appear, it helps to ask, is there a reason to believe this? Am I focusing on this because I expect it? Could stress or fear be playing a role? These questions don't solve the problem, but they open the door to thinking more clearly. The nocebo effect reminds us that health is not just physical. Belief, attention, and fear all shape the way the body feels. Words carry weight. A single warning or negative suggestion can echo in the mind and grow into real discomfort. Knowing this, we can be more careful about the messages we hear and the ones we give to others. The mere exposure effect is a psychological pattern where people begin to like something more simply because they see or hear it often. It works without conscious effort. You might not notice it happening, but repeated contact with a person, image, sound, or idea can lead to greater comfort, and that comfort builds into preference. This effect helps explain how opinions form, how advertising works, and even how relationships begin. Psychologist Robert Zajonc first described the mere exposure effect in the 1960s. He ran experiments where people were shown unfamiliar symbols or faces many times. Later, they were asked how much they liked them. The more they had seen a particular symbol or face, the more they said they liked it. This effect held true even when the symbols were shown very quickly, too quickly to consciously recognize. That showed the preference didn't need active attention or thought. The brain simply favored the familiar. The effect is based on the way our minds handle risk. New things carry some level of uncertainty. The brain treats unfamiliar situations with caution. Repeated exposure reduces that sense of risk. The brain begins to treat the thing as safe or neutral, and that feeling of safety creates comfort. Over time, that comfort turns into liking. This explains why a song might grow on you. The first time you hear it, it feels average. The second time, it's a little more catchy. By the 5th or 10th listen, you find yourself humming along. Nothing in the song changed. What changed was how familiar it became. That comfort feels like enjoyment, even if you didn't love it from the start. The same thing happens with faces. People tend to be more attracted to faces they see often. If you see someone at work or school every day, you may grow to like them, even if you've never spoken. That doesn't mean the person has special qualities. The exposure itself changes your emotional response. Familiarity lowers the emotional barrier. Strangers become likable simply by showing up enough times. In advertising, the mere exposure effect plays a central role. A logo seen often becomes easier to trust. A jingle played repeatedly becomes stuck in your head. You might not even notice it, but when you shop, you pick the brand that feels right. That feeling often comes from nothing more than repeated exposure. The brand doesn't have to be better, it just needs to be more present. This is why political campaigns spend so much money on signs, ads, and repeated slogans. A candidate's face or name, when seen often, starts to feel familiar. That familiarity leads to comfort, and comfort leads to trust. A voter may not know much about a candidate's policies, but may vote for the name that seems familiar and safe. The campaign doesn't need to change your mind. It only needs to make you feel that you already know them. The effect also shows up in daily habits. You might visit the same cafe every morning, not because it has the best coffee, but because it feels familiar. You listen to the same playlist, watch the same shows, and read the same websites because they feel comfortable. That sense of liking often comes from habit, not from quality or logic. But there's a limit. Too much exposure can reverse the effect. This is called wear out. If a song is played too many times in a row, it becomes annoying. If an ad appears every time you open a video, you may start to hate the brand. The mere exposure effect works best when the repetition is spaced out. The thing must stay familiar, but not overwhelming. Timing and variety help keep the effect strong. The effect is also influenced by mood and context. If you see something repeatedly during a stressful time, you may link the thing to that feeling. The exposure then makes you dislike it. But if the context is neutral or positive, the repeated exposure works more reliably. That's why good timing matters in design, marketing, and conversation. Exposure needs to feel safe, not forced. Social relationships often grow through the same process. Repeated casual contact builds comfort. This is called the propinquity effect, which is closely tied to mere exposure. The more often you see someone, even without deep conversation, the more likely you are to like them. This effect helps explain why people often become friends with coworkers, neighbors, or classmates. Physical closeness leads to repeated exposure, and that builds a kind of unconscious preference. Mere exposure also affects how we learn. Students may understand complex ideas more easily if they've been exposed to the concepts before in a simpler form. Repetition builds recognition. When a topic shows up again, it feels less threatening. That makes it easier to focus, engage, and retain the information. Teachers often use repetition in small doses for this reason, not to force memory, but to increase comfort and attention. The effect even helps in persuasion. A message repeated over time feels more believable, even if the content hasn't changed. If you hear a claim enough times, it starts to feel like common knowledge. This can be useful or dangerous. Propaganda and misinformation often rely on this tactic. The goal is not to prove the message, it's to make it feel familiar. Once it feels familiar, the brain is less likely to question it. In design, brands use consistent colors, fonts, and layouts to take advantage of this effect. A website that looks the same each time you visit becomes easier to trust. A product that repeats the same packaging or theme across different ads becomes more memorable. Consistency in design feeds the mere exposure effect. It builds familiarity, which builds liking. The effect also helps people adapt to change. At first, a new layout, rule, or tool may feel strange, but with time and repeated use, that discomfort fades. What once felt awkward starts to feel normal. The change becomes familiar and then accepted. This is why rolling out change slowly can help people adjust. Exposure softens resistance. While the mere exposure effect is not a rule for all situations, it shapes much of daily life. It operates in the background, guiding our choices without us knowing. What we like often starts with what we've seen. The more we see it, the more we accept it. And the more we accept it, the more we think we like it. This cycle repeats in media, habits, relationships, and memory, creating a pattern that feels natural, even when it's not based on logic or quality. The false consensus effect is a bias where people assume their beliefs, values, and behaviors are more common than they actually are. It makes us think that most people see the world the same way we do. This assumption feels natural, but it often leads to poor judgments, misunderstandings, and overconfidence in our opinions. The bias shows up in everyday decisions. If you like a certain movie, you might assume most people liked it too. If you believe a political opinion is obviously correct, you might think most people agree with it. If you follow a specific diet or lifestyle, you may believe it's more popular than it is. This happens because we use our own mindset as the starting point, and then stretch it outward, assuming others are probably similar. This effect was studied in the late 1970s by psychologists Lee Ross, David Green, and Pamela House. In one experiment, participants were asked whether they would agree to walk around campus wearing a sandwich board that said "Eat at Joe's." Some said yes, others said no. But both groups thought most people would make the same choice they did. Those who agreed assumed others would agree too. Those who refused believed others would refuse. In reality, responses were mixed, and the assumptions didn't match the truth. One reason for this bias is how we process information. The brain uses shortcuts to make sense of the world, and one shortcut is projecting our own views onto others. It's easier to assume people are like us than to constantly consider how different they might be. This shortcut helps us make quick decisions, but it also leads to false beliefs about how common or normal our views are. Another reason is social surroundings. We tend to spend time with people who are like us, friends, family, coworkers. And social media networks often share similar values and interests. These circles create echo chambers. When we hear the same opinions over and over, we begin to think those opinions are widespread. It feels like everyone agrees, but that's only true inside the circle. Outside of it, the world may be very different. Social media makes the effect stronger. Algorithms show us content that matches our likes and views. If you believe a certain idea and you engage with posts about it, the platform feeds you more of the same. This gives the impression that your view is dominant. You see post after post supporting your opinion, while opposing views seem rare or extreme. This false view of public opinion can lead to division, because both sides think they represent the majority. The false consensus effect can influence how we make decisions in groups. In a meeting, someone may assume their idea is obvious and widely accepted. They might skip explaining it, thinking it doesn't need discussion. But if others don't actually share the same view, confusion or disagreement follows. In some cases, group members stay silent because they believe everyone else agrees with the dominant voice. That silence is misread as support, and the false consensus grows. This effect also leads to overconfidence. If you believe most people agree with you, you may feel more certain that you're right. That certainty can make you less open to feedback or less willing to question your beliefs. It can also make you more likely to judge those who disagree. If your opinion feels like the obvious or normal one, then anyone who disagrees might seem strange, biased, or wrong. That judgment can damage relationships and reduce trust. False consensus plays a role in conflict. During arguments, each person may believe they represent the reasonable view. If both sides feel backed by a silent majority, they dig in harder. They stop listening, and they stop considering the other side. This creates deadlock. The disagreement becomes personal, not just about facts. Each person thinks, most people think like me, so I must be right. But both sides might be overestimating their support. In politics, this bias can mislead both voters and leaders. A politician might assume their position reflects the public will based on their supporters. A voter might think their view is common and wonder why polls don't match it. These misjudgments can lead to surprise, frustration, or backlash when the actual results show a different reality. Election outcomes often expose the false consensus by revealing how divided opinion really is. The effect can show up in education. A student who struggles with a subject might assume others are doing poorly too, just to feel better. Another student who finds the material easy might think the whole class does too, leading them to rush through group projects or dismiss questions from others. Both assumptions ignore the wide range of abilities in a typical classroom. The effect hides diversity of experience. Marketing and product design can also be affected. A designer might assume that customers will like a feature because they like it. A marketer might target ads based on their own preferences. This can work when the creator matches the audience, but often it leads to products that miss the mark. The people making the decisions think they represent the customer, but they may not. To reduce the false consensus effect, it helps to ask questions and seek data. Instead of assuming others think like you, look for real evidence. Polls, surveys, and feedback can reveal how people actually feel. Talking to people outside your usual group can also help. Hearing different views reminds you that your circle is just one piece of a larger picture. Being aware of the effect doesn't mean giving up your views. It means understanding that your views are not automatically shared by most people. This awareness makes you a better listener, a more careful thinker, and a more effective communicator. It helps you avoid missteps in relationships, teamwork, and decision-making. The false consensus effect does not mean people are selfish or narrow-minded. It means we rely on our own minds to understand the world, and that strategy has limits. We see through the lens of our own thoughts, and we expect others to see the same. That's a human habit. But recognizing that habit is the first step towards seeing the world more clearly. What feels normal to you might not feel that way to someone else. Knowing that difference exists helps build respect, even when agreement doesn't follow. A backfire effect is a bias where correcting someone's false belief causes them to hold on to that belief even more strongly. Instead of changing their mind when shown accurate information, the person doubles down on their original idea. This response is emotional, not logical. It often happens when the belief is tied to identity, values, or group loyalty. Psychologists started noticing this effect when studying political beliefs. In one experiment, researchers gave people false statements followed by corrections. For example, some participants were told that weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq after the 2003 invasion. Later, they were given clear evidence that this claim was false. But instead of changing their belief, some participants became more convinced that the weapons had been found. The correction triggered defensiveness rather than acceptance. The effect is strongest when the belief being challenged is tied to a person's worldview. If someone sees themselves as a loyal member of a political party and you show them a fact that contradicts their party's position, they may feel threatened. The correction feels like an attack, not just on the belief, but on the person's values and identity. To protect themselves, they reject the new information and cling harder to the belief. This response is linked to how the brain handles threats. When people feel their sense of self is under attack, the brain shifts into defense mode. Reasoning shuts down. Emotion takes over. The person may stop listening, question the source, or look for flaws in the logic. This isn't because they're dishonest. It's because the correction feels personal. The backfire effect also appears in social conversations. If someone spreads a false claim and you correct them, they may become defensive or annoyed. They may say, "Well, I still believe it," or "That's just your opinion." Even if your correction is backed by solid evidence, it might not work. In fact, it might make them dig in deeper. They may remember the correction less than they remember how it made them feel: angry, embarrassed, or dismissed. This happens online too, when people see fact checks or corrections under a post they agree with. They may reject the correction instead of the post. They may see the fact check as biased or unfair. This is called motivated reasoning. The person is not trying to find the truth. They are trying to protect what they already believe. The goal is not accuracy, it's emotional safety. The backfire effect makes it harder to fight misinformation. Just giving people facts is not always enough. In some cases, it can even do harm. If the correction feels like a confrontation, it can push people further into their false belief. This means that well-meaning efforts to correct lies can sometimes have the opposite result. Not all corrections lead to a backfire. The effect depends on the topic, the person, and the way the correction is delivered. If someone does not have a strong attachment to the belief, they may update their view easily. If the correction comes from a trusted source, it may be more effective. If it's delivered in a calm, respectful way, it may be easier to accept. The problem is not the correction itself, but how it's received. One way to reduce the backfire effect is to use affirmation. This means showing respect for the person before correcting them. You might say, "I know you care about getting things right," or "That's a common belief, and I used to think the same thing." This lowers the emotional barrier. It tells the person that the correction is not an attack. It makes them more open to hearing a different view. Another strategy is to present the correction in a way that matches the person's values. For example, if someone believes a false claim about climate change and they care about economic freedom, you might frame the correction around market-based solutions. That way, you're not just correcting the belief, you're linking it to a value they already hold. This makes the new information feel less like a threat. It also helps to ask questions rather than give answers. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," you might ask, "What makes you think that?" or "Where did you hear that?" This invites the person to reflect on their belief. It gives them space to think, rather than react. It's less likely to trigger a backfire. Visuals can also help. Graphs, photos, and clear comparisons can make facts easier to understand and harder to deny. When people see a simple, direct image, they process it faster and with less resistance. But even visuals can backfire if they feel like propaganda. The key is clarity without pressure. The backfire effect is not limited to politics. It appears in health, religion, and even personal memory. Someone may believe a certain food causes illness, even after medical evidence shows it doesn't. A person may remember an event one way and reject any proof that shows a different version. Once a belief takes hold, it becomes hard to shake, especially if it connects to emotion, identity, or trust. This is why rumors, conspiracy theories, and false claims spread easily. They appeal to emotion. They offer simple answers. They connect with fear, anger, or pride. Facts, on the other hand, are often slow, dull, or complicated. They don't always win in a direct fight. To be effective, facts must be paired with understanding of the audience, the emotion behind the belief, and the best way to share truth without causing shame or fear. The Backfire Effect shows how people don't always respond to facts with logic. Beliefs are not just ideas, they are part of who we are. When we protect beliefs, we are protecting ourselves. Knowing this changes how we talk, teach, and listen. It's not just about correcting others. It's about creating the space where change feels safe. Overconfidence bias is a thinking error where people believe they know more than they actually do. This belief is not just about skill, it often includes overestimating memory, judgment, or accuracy. The bias becomes more noticeable in areas where people have little experience or where feedback is limited. A person might feel sure about a decision or fact without having the knowledge to support that confidence. The gap between what they know and what they think they know creates risk. The bias shows up in many areas of life. In finance, someone might feel sure that a stock will go up, even though they have no background in market trends or data analysis. In medicine, a patient might feel they can diagnose themselves better than a doctor after reading a few articles online. In driving, most people think they are better than average behind the wheel, even though that cannot be true for everyone. This effect stretches across skill, memory, prediction, and judgment. Overconfidence does not mean a person is lying or trying to impress others. Most of the time, it happens without awareness. The brain tends to reward confidence because confidence feels good. It gives a sense of control and reduces doubt. In unfamiliar situations, the brain fills in blanks with guesses that feel true. Those guesses turn into beliefs. Once someone feels certain, they may stop questioning or seeking more information. One experiment showed how far the bias can go. Participants were asked trivia questions like the length of the Nile River or the year of a historical event. They gave their best guess and were also asked to give a range that they were 90% sure included the right answer. Most of the time, their ranges did not include the correct answer. They believed they were more accurate than they were. The more certain they felt, the more often they were wrong. This gap between confidence and accuracy leads to problems in planning and decision-making. In business, overconfident leaders may take big risks without seeing the full cost. They may set deadlines that are too short, promise results that are unlikely, or ignore warnings. The same thing happens in startups. Founders might believe their idea will succeed because it makes sense to them. But without checking the market, testing the product, or listening to critics, they miss real issues. The result is failure that feels like surprise. In the legal system, overconfidence can affect witnesses, jurors, and even lawyers. A witness may believe they remember details clearly, but memory does not work like a video recorder. It changes over time. Yet a confident witness can sound very persuasive, even when wrong. Jurors may trust their gut feelings about guilt or innocence without fully weighing the evidence. Lawyers may believe they will win a case based on personal skill rather than facts or legal standing. In education, students may overestimate their understanding of a subject. Before a test, they may feel prepared because the material sounds familiar. But familiarity is not the same as mastery. They may skip studying because they believe they already know enough. After the test, they are surprised by poor results. The confidence was real, but misplaced. Overconfidence also affects forecasting. Experts who make predictions about politics, economics, or world events often speak with great certainty. But studies show that even trained professionals have poor accuracy when making long-term predictions. The more confident the prediction, the more likely it is to be wrong. Confidence signals belief, not truth. There are several forms of overconfidence. One is overestimation, thinking your skill, ability, or knowledge is greater than it is. Another is overplacement, believing you are better than others even without proof. A third is overprecision, being too sure that your guesses or beliefs are correct. Each type leads to different kinds of errors, but all come from the same source: a mismatch between belief and reality. The bias is more common when feedback is weak or delayed. If someone makes a bad choice but does not see the result until much later, they may not learn from the mistake. Without clear feedback, they may continue to trust their judgment. This is one reason why overconfidence can last a long time. It builds on past choices that were never questioned. It also grows when people avoid disconfirming information. A person may surround themselves with people who agree, read articles that support their views, or dismiss critics. This echo chamber makes their belief feel stronger. They stop checking other views. Confidence rises even though the quality of thinking does not. Not all confidence is harmful. Some level of self-belief helps people try new things, take risks, and stay motivated. But overconfidence becomes a problem when it leads to ignoring evidence, rejecting feedback, or making decisions without proper care. It blocks learning and limits awareness. It feels like strength, but it hides weakness. To reduce the bias, people can build habits of reflection and feedback. Asking, "What if I'm wrong?" is a good place to start. Comparing predictions to outcomes helps track real accuracy. Using data rather than gut feeling improves planning. In group work, assigning a devil's advocate forces review of assumptions. In education, low-stakes testing helps students see what they truly understand. Another useful step is to separate confidence from correctness. Just because something feels true does not mean it is. Repeating a belief, hearing agreement, or trusting memory does not guarantee accuracy. Slowing down, checking sources, and testing ideas against evidence creates a more reliable path. Overconfidence bias is part of how the brain works. It serves a purpose by giving people drive and focus. But when left unchecked, it can cause mistakes, failure, and misunderstanding. The challenge is not to avoid all confidence, but to match it with awareness. That means knowing what you know and knowing when you don't. Projection is a defense mechanism where we take our own unwanted thoughts, feelings, or traits and assign them to someone else. It happens without us realizing it. The process protects the ego from discomfort. If a person feels something they don't want to admit, like jealousy, fear, or anger, their mind may deal with it by seeing that emotion in someone else instead of in themselves. This keeps the self-image safe, but creates distortion in how they view others. The concept of projection comes from psychoanalysis, especially the work of Sigmund Freud. He believed that people protect themselves from internal conflict by pushing distressing emotions outward. Instead of facing the fact that they are angry or selfish, they may believe someone else is. This helps them avoid guilt or shame. While Freud's version was rooted in his broader theory of the unconscious, the basic idea remains part of modern psychology. Projection can take many forms. A person who often lies might accuse others of being dishonest. Someone who feels insecure might say that everyone else is judging them. A partner who's unfaithful might constantly accuse the other of cheating. In each case, the projection shifts attention from the self to the outside world. It redirects the focus and keeps the uncomfortable emotion at a distance. This process is not a choice. It happens automatically. The person does not sit down and decide to blame someone else. Instead, their brain shields them from stress by reshaping how they see others. The traits that are hardest to accept become the traits they claim to see in other people. Projection can damage relationships. If one person constantly accuses the other of being critical, they may become defensive, even if they weren't being critical in the first place. Over time, trust breaks down. The relationship becomes less about real interaction and more about managing someone's internal fears. People start responding not to what the other person does, but to what they imagine they are doing. This can happen in families, friendships, or workplaces. In a team setting, one person might say, "Nobody respects my ideas," when they actually struggle to respect others' opinions. Or someone might say, "He's only in it for himself," when they are the one acting in self-interest. The projection makes them believe they're reacting to reality, not to their own inner feelings. Projection also appears in broader social behavior. People who dislike a certain group may claim that group is the one spreading hate. A person who feels threatened might say that others are always aggressive. This helps them justify their fear or anger while keeping their self-image clean. It allows them to act out in harmful ways while believing they are only defending themselves. In politics, projection is often used to gain support. A leader might accuse opponents of lying or corruption while hiding their own dishonesty. Supporters may adopt this view without question. The projection then spreads, shaping group beliefs. The group sees the world not as it is, but as their leader's defense mechanism defines it. Psychologically, projection helps reduce anxiety. It creates distance from parts of ourselves we don't like. But that relief comes with a cost. It prevents self-awareness. It stops people from taking responsibility for their feelings. Over time, this can lead to more stress, isolation, and conflict. Projection often works alongside other defense mechanisms. Denial helps a person ignore a truth they don't want to face. Rationalization lets them explain it away. Projection puts it on someone else. Together, these patterns make it harder to grow emotionally or solve problems honestly. They may protect the ego, but they blur the line between self and world. There are also positive forms of projection, no less common. Sometimes people assign their best qualities to others. A kind person might assume others are also kind. A loyal person may believe everyone else shares their sense of duty. While this may create pleasant feelings, it can lead to disappointment when others do not act the same way. Positive projection can set unrealistic expectations and create blind spots in judgment. Projection is easier to spot in others than in ourselves. That's because it protects the mind from direct awareness. But there are signs. If someone gets overly upset at a minor behavior in someone else, that might be projection. If a person frequently accuses others of the same few things, it's worth asking if those things reflect their own fears. If the emotional reaction seems stronger than the situation calls for, something deeper may be at work. Therapists often help clients notice projection. Instead of focusing on what others are doing, they ask what the person is feeling. If someone says, "Everyone hates me," the therapist might ask, "Do you feel like you're hating yourself right now?" This shift helps bring the projection back to its source. Over time, people can learn to spot the pattern and take ownership of their emotions. In relationships, naming projection gently can help. If someone accuses you unfairly, it can help to say, "Is it possible you're feeling that way yourself?" This isn't about blame. It's about making space to reflect. When people realize they are projecting, they can begin to reclaim those feelings and work with them directly. Self-reflection is the key to reducing projection. That means checking in with your own emotions before judging others. Asking, "Why does this bother me so much?" can uncover hidden feelings. Writing about reactions, taking a break before responding, or talking things through with someone neutral can help. These practices give space between feeling and acting. Projection is part of being human. Everyone does it sometimes. The challenge is not to eliminate it completely, but to recognize it when it happens. The more we understand our inner world, the less we need to put it on others. By facing what we feel, we reduce the need to project. We become more honest, less reactive, and more able to connect with people as they really are, not as mirrors of our fears. The placebo effect happens when a person experiences real improvement after receiving a treatment that has no active ingredients or direct physical effect. The change comes not from the treatment itself, but from the person's belief that the treatment will work. This belief triggers changes in the brain and body that lead to better outcomes. The effect is most often seen in medicine, but can also appear in other areas where expectations shape experience. Doctors and researchers discovered the placebo effect while testing new drugs. To see if a drug works, researchers often divide patients into two groups. One group receives the real drug. The other gets a placebo, a pill that looks the same, but contains no medicine. Surprisingly, many people in the placebo group report feeling better. They sleep more, feel less pain, or recover faster. Even though they received no active medicine, their bodies responded as if they had. This happens because belief affects biology. When someone expects to get better, the brain releases chemicals like endorphins and dopamine. These are natural painkillers and mood boosters. They help reduce pain, improve mood, and support healing. Brain scans show that placebo treatments can activate the same areas that respond to real drugs. In other words, belief sets off real processes inside the body. The placebo effect is strongest when the treatment looks convincing. A sugar pill in a plain envelope may not do much, but if it comes in a shiny bottle with a doctor's note, it feels more real. If the person giving it wears a white coat and speaks with confidence, the effect grows. The setting, the tone, and the details all add to the expectation that something good will happen. That expectation is what drives the response. This effect shows up in many health conditions, especially those related to pain, anxiety, sleep, and digestion. A patient with chronic back pain may feel relief after taking a placebo. Someone with insomnia may fall asleep more easily after taking a fake sleep aid. People with irritable bowel symptoms often report fewer problems after placebo treatments. These are not imaginary changes. They are real shifts in how the body feels and works. Placebos also influence how people respond to surgery. In some trials, patients with knee pain were given fake surgeries. Doctors made a small cut and pretended to perform the procedure. The patients didn't know the surgery was fake. Many of them reported less pain and improved movement afterward. Their belief in the surgery was strong enough to change their experience. Again, this shows the power of expectation and belief. The placebo effect can even change how real drugs work. If someone believes a drug is strong and helpful, it tends to work better. If they expect side effects, they are more likely to feel them. This means that the brain shapes both the benefits and risks of treatment. The label, the color of the pill, the way it is described, all of these influence the outcome. This doesn't mean placebos cure diseases. They don't shrink tumors, kill bacteria, or repair broken bones, but they can change how the body reacts to symptoms. They can reduce stress, ease pain, and help the body focus on healing. In this way, the placebo effect supports the body's own systems rather than replacing medical treatment. Doctors must be careful when using placebos. They cannot lie to patients, and they should not use placebos in place of real treatment for serious conditions. But studies show that even when people are told they are getting a placebo, they sometimes still feel better. These are called open-label placebos. In these cases, the patients know the pill is inactive, but they still experience benefits because they believe in the process. This suggests that rituals, attention, and care matter just as much as the substance being used. When a patient sees a doctor, shares concerns, and receives a treatment, real or not, the process itself helps them feel supported. That support may lead to reduced stress and better health. The act of being cared for becomes part of the treatment. The placebo effect also affects how people view fitness and performance. In one experiment, hotel workers were told that their daily work met the standard for physical exercise. They changed nothing in their routine, but after a few weeks, they showed improved health, lower blood pressure, weight loss, and better energy levels. Just believing they were exercising changed their mindset and likely influenced how their bodies responded. In sports, athletes sometimes perform better after taking a placebo they believe is a performance enhancer. The body responds to the belief by releasing chemicals that improve focus, reduce fatigue, or sharpen reaction time. Again, the change comes not from the pill, but from what the mind expects it to do. The placebo effect shows that healing is not just about chemistry. It is also about belief, emotion, and the relationship between the body and the mind. This does not make medicine less important. It shows that medicine works best when it includes the person's mental and emotional state. Placebos can also teach people how much control they have over how they feel. They show that attention, expectation, and attitude matter. If someone believes in a treatment, follows a routine, and receives support, the outcomes often improve. This is not magic. It is biology responding to belief. Still, the placebo effect has limits. It does not cure cancer or reverse infections. It works best on symptoms that are shaped by brain chemistry, like pain, fatigue, or stress. It is also hard to predict. Not everyone responds the same way. Some people feel strong effects, while others feel nothing. The reasons for this difference are still being studied. Doctors and researchers use placebos to test how well new treatments work. If a new drug performs better than a placebo, it means the drug has real effects beyond belief. But if the drug performs the same as the placebo, then it may not be effective. Placebo-controlled trials are the gold standard for medical research because they separate real results from the power of belief. Some people feel disappointed when they hear about the placebo effect. They think it means the results are fake or imagined, but the effect is real. It shows how belief changes biology. It helps us understand how powerful the brain can be in shaping the body. Instead of seeing it as weakness, we can see it as a tool, a way the mind helps the body heal. Hyperbolic discounting is a decision-making bias where people prefer smaller, immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones. Even when waiting would lead to a better outcome, the appeal of instant gratification often wins. This pattern seems irrational on the surface, but it's a common part of human behavior. The brain places more value on what is available now than what will come later. The closer a reward is in time, the more heavily it weighs in our decision. Researchers discovered this effect while studying how people value future outcomes. In one experiment, people were offered a choice: get $50 today or $100 in 6 months. Many chose the $50, but when asked to choose between $50 in 6 months or $100 in 12 months, most picked the $100. The delay between rewards stayed the same, but because both options were in the future, people were more willing to wait. This shows that time affects how we judge value, and the effect is stronger when the reward is closer to the present. This kind of thinking is not just about money. It affects eating habits, exercise, studying, saving, and even addiction. A person might plan to start a diet next week, but eat junk food today. They know the long-term goal matters more, but the short-term pleasure feels stronger. A student might delay studying because rest or entertainment feels more rewarding right now. A smoker may intend to quit, but still light a cigarette, even while knowing the health risks. The problem isn't that the long-term rewards are unclear. It's that they feel far away and less real. Hyperbolic discounting differs from rational discounting. In economics, future value is often discounted at a consistent rate. For example, $1 today is worth more than $1 in a year because of inflation and opportunity cost. This is called exponential discounting. It uses a fixed percentage to lower the value over time. But in real life, people don't follow this neat rule. We discount the near future much more steeply than the distant future. The curve of value drops sharply at the beginning and then flattens out. That's what makes it hyperbolic. This steep drop creates conflict between our present self and our future self. The present self wants comfort, ease, and pleasure now. The future self wants savings, health, and achievement. But the present self makes the decisions. It tends to win because it controls the moment. That's why people often act against their own long-term interests. The effects of hyperbolic discounting show up in financial behavior. Many people struggle to save money even when they understand the importance of saving. A new gadget or vacation now feels better than retirement savings decades away. Credit cards make the problem worse. They allow people to enjoy rewards now and delay the pain of payment. The result is debt, which adds stress and reduces freedom later. In health, the bias leads to skipped workouts, poor diets, and ignored warnings. People may delay getting medical checkups or taking medicine because the benefit is in the future. They may choose comfort today over health later. This leads to chronic problems that could have been prevented. Marketers understand this bias and use it in sales. Offers like buy now, pay later, or instant access appeal directly to the desire for immediate rewards. Subscription services, fast food, and impulse purchases are all shaped by the promise of now. Even when customers know they're giving up better long-term deals, the short-term offer feels more real. Hyperbolic discounting also affects public policy. Governments may delay needed reforms because the benefits are long-term while the costs are immediate. Voters may support short-term relief over long-term solutions. This creates cycles of underinvestment in infrastructure, education, or environmental protection. The public favors policies that offer fast results, even if those results come at a long-term cost. To manage this bias, people often use commitment strategies. A person might set up automatic savings, join a gym with a contract, or use apps that block distractions. These tools help align the present self with the future self. They reduce the power of the moment by setting rules in advance. For example, someone might decide to save 10% of every paycheck before spending any. Once the money is out of reach, the temptation fades. The decision was made when the future felt more important, and the system helps lock it in. Another strategy is to break long-term goals into smaller, short-term steps. If a person wants to lose weight, they might aim to cook a healthy meal today, rather than think about losing 10 kilos over a year. This turns the long-term reward into something the present self can connect with. Each small success builds toward the larger goal. Visualizing the future can also help. When people imagine themselves years from now, older, retired, or facing health challenges, they may feel a stronger emotional link to their future self. That link makes delayed rewards feel more real. Some studies even show that people save more money after seeing an aged photo of themselves. The visual made the future self feel like a real person, not a stranger. Social pressure can support long-term goals too. If someone tells friends about a plan or joins a group with similar aims, they feel more committed. The risk of letting others down adds motivation. This can work for quitting smoking, saving for a trip, or finishing a project. The shared goal creates accountability, which helps the present self think beyond the moment. Despite these tools, hyperbolic discounting remains a strong force. It is built into how the brain handles reward and time. The dopamine system responds more to immediate pleasure than to distant gain. This made sense in the past. When resources were scarce, it was smart to take rewards when they appeared. Waiting could mean losing out. But in today's world, where long-term planning is crucial, this instinct often backfires. Recognizing this bias is the first step in managing it. People who understand their tendency to favor now over later can build systems that protect their long-term interests. It's not about having your willpower. It's about designing better choices. Small changes in how decisions are framed, timed, or triggered can make a big difference. Hyperbolic discounting explains why good intentions often fail. It shows that rational thinking is not always enough. The pull of the present is strong, but it can be managed with the right strategies. By understanding how the mind discounts the future, people can create better habits, make smarter decisions, and build a life that balances now and later. Cognitive dissonance is a mental discomfort people feel when their thoughts, beliefs, or actions do not align. The psychologist Leon Festinger introduced the term in the 1950s. He described it as a tension that arises when someone holds two conflicting ideas at the same time or behaves in a way that goes against their beliefs. To reduce this tension, people change their thoughts, adjust their beliefs, or twist facts to make everything feel consistent again. The goal is to restore internal harmony. This discomfort is not minor. It affects how people see themselves and the world. Most people want to believe they are logical, honest, and consistent. When reality challenges that belief, it creates pressure. That pressure leads to changes, not always in behavior, but often in thinking. People may not notice these shifts because the mind does them automatically. The changes happen to protect the person from feeling uneasy or guilty. One of Festinger's famous studies involved a boring task. Participants were asked to turn pegs on a board for an hour. The task had no meaning or reward. After finishing, they were told to tell the next participant that the task was fun. Some were paid $1 for this lie. Others were paid $20. Later, the participants were asked how much they had actually enjoyed the task. The group that was paid only $1 reported liking it more. This may seem strange, but it fits the theory. The people paid $20 had a clear reason to lie, money. But the $1 group had no good reason. To resolve the tension between their action, lying, and their belief, the task was boring. They convinced themselves the task wasn't so bad. That change reduced the dissonance. Cognitive dissonance also shows up in consumer behavior. After buying an expensive item, a person may look for reasons to justify the cost. They might tell themselves it will last longer, works better, or saves money in the long run, even if those claims are not true. This helps ease any regret or doubt. The more difficult the choice, the stronger the need to believe it was the right one. People may read positive reviews, avoid negative ones, or compare their item favorably to others. They want to believe they made a smart choice, so they shape their thinking to match. This effect is also clear in smoking. A smoker knows that cigarettes are harmful. That knowledge conflicts with the act of smoking. To reduce dissonance, the person might say, "Lots of people smoke and live long lives," or "something else will probably kill me first." These thoughts may not be accurate, but they serve a purpose. They reduce the discomfort of acting against what the person believes about health. The smoker is not trying to fool others, only to settle the tension inside. In politics, cognitive dissonance helps explain why people hold on to beliefs, even when facts suggest they are wrong. If a voter strongly supports a candidate, and that candidate does something questionable, the voter may downplay the event. They may say it was taken out of context, or that others are worse. Admitting the truth would mean admitting poor judgment. That creates dissonance. It's easier to change the story than to change the belief. Religious or ideological beliefs work the same way. When faced with evidence that goes against a core belief, people may dismiss the evidence, attack the source, or reframe the meaning. This helps them stay committed to the belief without feeling hypocritical. They protect the structure of their worldview, even if it means bending reality. Dissonance also affects relationships. If someone sees themselves as kind but treats a friend badly, they may explain the behavior by blaming the friend. They might say he was being rude or she deserved it. These justifications help the person see themselves as consistent. They ease the discomfort of behaving in a way that doesn't match the self-image. Cognitive dissonance can lead to growth, but only if the person faces the tension instead of avoiding it. When someone realizes that their beliefs and actions don't match, they can make real changes. They might stop a bad habit, shift an opinion, or apologize for past behavior. But this takes effort and openness. Most of the time, people look for quick ways to feel better instead. Avoiding dissonance can create blind spots. It can make people ignore mistakes, stay in harmful situations, or support views they no longer believe in. The need for inner peace becomes more important than the truth. This is why dissonance can block learning and change. People filter out facts that cause discomfort and hold on to ones that confirm what they already think. The strength of dissonance depends on how important the belief is. If a belief is central to identity, the tension is stronger when it is challenged. A person who sees themselves as honest will feel more dissonance after lying than someone who doesn't care much about honesty. The stronger the belief, the harder the mind works to protect it. Dissonance can also affect memory. People may remember events in ways that fit their current beliefs. If they hurt someone in the past, they might recall the event differently to protect their self-image. They may forget their role, focus on the other person's actions, or invent reasons for their behavior. These shifts in memory are not always conscious. They come from the brain's attempt to reduce discomfort. Social pressure can increase or reduce dissonance. If a person's friends all agree on a belief, going against it can create tension. The person might change their view to match the group, not because of the facts, but to avoid standing out. On the other hand, if the group supports reflection and honesty, the person might feel more freedom to face dissonance and make changes. In therapy, recognizing cognitive dissonance can help people grow. A client may notice that they want trust but lie often, or that they value health but neglect it. Pointing out the gap between belief and behavior can start a process of change. But it must be done with care. If the tension becomes too strong, the person may shut down or reject the message. Small, steady steps often work better. Cognitive dissonance is not a flaw. It is part of how the brain protects itself. It helps people manage the stress of daily life, especially when choices are hard. But when it goes unchecked, it creates distance from truth and growth. Being aware of it helps people understand why they think the way they do and what they might do to change. Actor-observer bias is a common thinking error where people explain their own actions by pointing to outside causes, but blame other people's actions on internal flaws. When we do something wrong, we tend to say the situation forced us into it. When someone else does the same thing, we tend to say it happened because of their character. This pattern shapes how we view blame, responsibility, and behavior. It influences personal relationships, social judgment, and even justice systems. Imagine you are late to a meeting. You might say the traffic was bad, the alarm didn't go off, or you had a last-minute emergency. But if someone else walks in late, you might think they're careless, disorganized, or disrespectful. The difference in explanation is not based on facts, it's based on perspective. You see your own situation from the inside. You know all the reasons behind your choices, but you see others only from the outside, so you focus on what they did, not what might have caused it. This bias comes from the way we process information. When we think about our own actions, we remember the context. We know what happened that day, how we felt, and what challenges we faced. But when we look at someone else, we don't have that same insight. We see only the action, not the full story. The brain fills in the blanks by assuming the behavior reflects the person, not the situation. Psychologists first described the actor-observer bias in the 1970s. In one study, participants watched conversations between strangers. When asked to explain the behavior of the person they were watching, they focused on personality traits. But when asked to explain their own behavior in a similar situation, they focused on external pressures. The pattern repeated across many tasks. People judged others as stable and predictable, but saw themselves as flexible and influenced by context. This bias shows up often in conflict. If you snap at someone during a stressful day, you might think it was because you were tired, hungry, or under pressure. But if they snap at you, you might think they're rude or impatient. This leads to misunderstanding. Each person feels justified in their own actions, but judged unfairly by the other. The result is frustration, defensiveness, and resentment. In close relationships, this pattern can grow over time. A partner who forgets an important date may explain it by saying work was overwhelming. But if the other person forgets something, they may be called thoughtless. These judgments become habits. People start to believe they are being treated unfairly, even when both sides are falling into the same bias. The actor-observer bias also plays a role in how we view success and failure. If you get a promotion, you might say it happened because you worked hard. But if someone else gets promoted, you might think they had connections or got lucky. If you make a mistake, you might blame stress or lack of sleep. But if someone else does, you might assume they're careless or not smart enough. This double standard affects how we judge others and how we see ourselves. It also shows up in broader social settings. In public debates, people tend to defend their group and blame problems on others. A person might say their side was forced to act a certain way because of pressure or injustice. Actor-observer bias is a common thinking error where people explain their own actions by pointing to outside causes, but blame other people's actions on internal flaws. When we do something wrong, we tend to say the situation forced us into it. When someone else does the same thing, we tend to say it happened because of their character. This pattern shapes how we view blame, responsibility, and behavior. It influences personal relationships, social judgment, and even justice systems. Imagine you are late to a meeting. You might say the traffic was bad, the alarm didn't go off, or you had a last-minute emergency. But if someone else walks in late, you might think they're careless, disorganized, or disrespectful. The difference in explanation is not based on facts. It's based on perspective. You see your own situation from the inside. You know all the reasons behind your choices, but you see others only from the outside, so you focus on what they did, not what might have caused it. This bias comes from the way we process information. When we think about our own actions, we remember the context. We know what happened that day, how we felt, and what challenges we faced. But when we look at someone else, we don't have that same insight. We see only the action, not the full story. The brain fills in the blanks by assuming the behavior reflects the person, not the situation. Psychologists first described the actor-observer bias in the 1970s. In one study, participants watched conversations between strangers. When asked to explain the behavior of the person they were watching, they focused on personality traits. But when asked to explain their own behavior in a similar situation, they focused on external pressures. The pattern repeated across many tasks. People judged others as stable and predictable, but saw themselves as flexible and influenced by context. This bias shows up often in conflict. If you snap at someone during a stressful day, you might think it was because you were tired, hungry, or under pressure. But if they snap at you, you might think they're rude or impatient. This leads to misunderstanding. Each person feels justified in their own actions, but judged unfairly by the other. The result is frustration, defensiveness, and resentment. In close relationships, this pattern can grow over time. A partner who forgets an important date may explain it by saying work was overwhelming. But if the other person forgets something, they may be called thoughtless. These judgments become habits. People start to believe they are being treated unfairly, even when both sides are falling into the same bias. The actor-observer bias also plays a role in how we view success and failure. If you get a promotion, you might say it happened because you worked hard. But if someone else gets promoted, you might think they had connections or got lucky. If you make a mistake, you might blame stress or lack of sleep. But if someone else does, you might assume they're careless or not smart enough. This double standard affects how we judge others and how we see ourselves. It also shows up in broader social settings. The just world hypothesis is a belief that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It assumes that the world is fair, orderly, and predictable. If someone suffers, the belief says they must have done something wrong. If someone succeeds, they must have earned it. This idea gives people a sense of control and comfort. It helps them feel that life makes sense. But it often leads to unfair judgments, especially when bad things happen to good people. Psychologist Melvin Lerner studied this belief in the 1960s. He noticed that people watching others suffer often tried to explain it in moral terms. If a person failed, observers looked for flaws in their character or choices. If someone was harmed, observers tried to blame them for their situation. Lerner called this the belief in a just world. It was not about facts. It was about the need to believe that the world is fair. This belief shows up in everyday thinking. When someone hears that a person was robbed, they might say, they shouldn't have been walking there so late. If a student fails an exam, others might think, they probably didn't study hard enough. If someone is poor, the thought might be, they must be lazy. These responses do not look at context. They assume the outcome reflects the person's actions or traits. That way, the observer can feel safe. They can think, that won't happen to me because I make better choices. The just world hypothesis helps reduce fear. If the world is fair, then bad things won't happen to good people for no reason. It means people can trust their actions to bring fair results. This belief gives a sense of justice without needing to look too closely at chance, inequality, or random events. But that comfort comes at a cost. It often leads people to ignore or deny injustice. One example is how people respond to victims of crime. If someone is assaulted, observers may focus on the victim's behavior, what they wore, where they went, or who they spoke to. Instead of focusing on the harm done, the response shifts to blame. This helps the observer feel that such things only happen to careless or risky people. But it overlooks the fact that the victim did nothing to deserve the harm. The same pattern happens with poverty. People often believe that those who are poor must have made bad choices. They assume effort always leads to success and failure always reflects laziness. But economic systems are complex. Many people work hard and still struggle. Others inherit wealth without effort. The just worldview ignores these realities. It treats success as proof of virtue and failure as proof of vice. This belief also appears in medical situations. If someone is seriously ill, others might ask if they smoked, ate poorly, or failed to exercise. The goal is not always to judge, but to feel safe. People want to believe that illness comes from bad habits. That way, they can feel protected by their own choices. But this view overlooks genetic factors, environmental risks, and random chance. It turns illness into a moral failing, which can isolate people who are already suffering. In courts, the just world bias can influence jurors. They may see a victim as partly responsible for a crime or see a defendant as clearly guilty because the charge exists. They may look for reasons to believe the system works, even when evidence shows flaws. This belief in the just world hypothesis is a belief that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It assumes that the world is fair, orderly, and predictable. If someone suffers, the belief says they must have done something wrong. If someone succeeds, they must have earned it. This idea gives people a sense of control and comfort. It helps them feel that life makes sense. But it often leads to unfair judgments, especially when bad things happen to good people. Psychologist Melvin Lerner studied this belief in the 1960s. He noticed that people watching others suffer often tried to explain it in moral terms. If a person failed, observers looked for flaws in their character or choices. If someone was harmed, observers tried to blame them for their situation. Lerner called this the belief in a just world. It was not about facts. It was about the need to believe that the world is fair. This belief shows up in everyday thinking. When someone hears that a person was robbed, they might say, they shouldn't have been walking there so late. If a student fails an exam, others might think, they probably didn't study hard enough. If someone is poor, the thought might be, they must be lazy. These responses do not look at context. They assume the outcome reflects the person's actions or traits. That way, the observer can feel safe. They can think, that won't happen to me because I make better choices. The just world hypothesis helps reduce fear. If the world is fair, then bad things won't happen to good people for no reason. It means people can trust their actions to bring fair results. This belief gives a sense of justice without needing to look too closely at chance, inequality, or random events. But that comfort comes at a cost. It often leads people to ignore or deny injustice. One example is how people respond to victims of crime. If someone is assaulted, observers may focus on the victim's behavior, what they wore, where they went, or who they spoke to. Instead of focusing on the harm done, the response shifts to blame. This helps the observer feel that such things only happen to careless or risky people. But it overlooks the fact that the victim did nothing to deserve the harm. The same pattern happens with poverty. People often believe that those who are poor must have made bad choices. They assume effort always leads to success, and failure always reflects laziness. But economic systems are complex. Many people work hard and still struggle. Others inherit wealth without effort. The just worldview ignores these realities. It treats success as proof of virtue and failure as proof of vice. This belief also appears in medical situations. If someone is seriously ill, others might ask if they smoked, ate poorly, or failed to exercise. The goal is not always to judge, but to feel safe. People want to believe that illness comes from bad habits. That way, they can feel protected by their inattentional blindness is a mental glitch where people fail to notice something that is right in front of them because their attention is focused elsewhere. It doesn't happen because of poor eyesight or memory. It happens because attention is limited. The brain picks a target to focus on and filters out everything else. This helps people concentrate, but also creates blind spots. Sometimes, these blind spots include things that are large, strange, or important. The most famous demonstration of this idea is the invisible gorilla experiment by psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabries. In the experiment, participants watched a video of 6 people passing basketballs. They were told to count how many times the players in white shirts passed the ball. While the players moved around and passed the ball, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene, stopped in the middle, beat their chest, and walked out. The gorilla was in the center of the frame for 9 seconds. Afterward, many participants said they never saw it. Their attention was so focused on counting passes that the gorilla didn't register. This experiment shocked many people because it showed how limited attention really is. People think they see the whole picture, but they only see what they are looking for. The brain uses attention like a spotlight. It lights up one area and dims the rest. When the spotlight is on a task like counting, it misses other events, even ones that should be obvious. Inattentional blindness shows up in real life more often than people expect. Drivers may look straight ahead, but still miss a pedestrian in the road if their attention is focused on a GPS screen or on a traffic light turning yellow. Pilots may overlook an important instrument reading if they're distracted by an alarm or by dealing with bad weather. Surgeons may miss signs of a problem while focused on a specific part of the procedure. In each case, the person is trained, alert, and looking, but attention is elsewhere. This kind of blindness does not mean the person is careless or inattentive. It means their brain is doing what it always does, managing limited attention. The brain cannot process every piece of input at once, so it prioritizes. Whatever matches the task goal gets processed. Everything else is pushed aside. One reason inattentional blindness feels strange is because of how people think vision works. Most people believe their eyes are like video cameras, recording everything in front of them. But that's not how perception works. The brain does not create a full picture. It creates a useful one. It fills in gaps, filters noise, and focuses on what seems important. If the task is to count passes, the brain focuses on the ball and the players wearing white. A person in a gorilla suit becomes background noise. This kind of filtering helps people survive. If the brain noticed every leaf, every sound, and every shadow, it would be overwhelmed. Filtering keeps the world manageable. It helps people focus on goals. But the cost is that people miss things they are not expecting. The role of expectation is key. People often don't see what they're not looking for. If someone expects a smooth meeting, they might miss signs that a colleague is upset. Inattentional blindness is a mental glitch where people fail to notice something that is right in front of them because their attention is focused elsewhere. It doesn't happen because of poor eyesight or memory. It happens because attention is limited. The brain picks a target to focus on and filters out everything else. This helps people concentrate, but also creates blind spots. Sometimes, these blind spots include things that are large, strange, or important. The most famous demonstration of this idea is the invisible gorilla experiment by psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabries. In the experiment, participants watched a video of 6 people passing basketballs. They were told to count how many times the players in white shirts passed the ball. While the players moved around and passed the ball, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene, stopped in the middle, beat their chest, and walked out. The gorilla was in the center of the frame for 9 seconds. Afterward, many participants said they never saw it. Their attention was so focused on counting passes that the gorilla didn't register. This experiment shocked many people because it showed how limited attention really is. People think they see the whole picture, but they only see what they are looking for. The brain uses attention like a spotlight. It lights up one area and dims the rest. When the spotlight is on a task like counting, it misses other events, even ones that should be obvious. Inattentional blindness shows up in real life more often than people expect. Drivers may look straight ahead, but still miss a pedestrian in the road if their attention is focused on a GPS screen or on a traffic light turning yellow. Pilots may overlook an important instrument reading if they're distracted by an alarm or by dealing with bad weather. Surgeons may miss signs of a problem while focused on a specific part of the procedure. In each case, the person is trained, alert, and looking, but attention is elsewhere. This kind of blindness does not mean the person is careless or inattentive. It means their brain is doing what it always does, managing limited attention. The brain cannot process every piece of input at once, so it prioritizes. Whatever matches the task goal gets processed. Everything else is pushed aside. One reason inattentional blindness feels strange is because of how people think vision works. Most people believe their eyes are like video cameras, recording everything in front of them. But that's not how perception works. The brain does not create a full picture. It creates a useful one. It fills in gaps, filters noise, and focuses on what seems important. If the task is to count passes, the brain focuses on the ball and the players wearing white. A person in a gorilla suit becomes background noise. This kind of filtering helps people survive. If the brain noticed every leaf, every sound, and every shadow, it would be overwhelmed. Filtering keeps the world manageable. It helps people focus on goals. But the cost is that people miss things they are not expecting. The role of expectation is key. People often don't see what they're not looking for. If someone expects a smooth meeting, they might miss signs that a colleague is upset. If a person expects a routine task, they may not see a mistake happening right in front of them. This explains why people often say, "I didn't see it." After confirmation bias is the tendency to seek, notice, and remember information that supports what we already believe, while ignoring or downplaying information that goes against our views. It's not always a conscious choice. Often, it happens automatically. The brain prefers agreement. It avoids conflict and discomfort. So it focuses on what fits and filters out what doesn't. This bias affects how we form opinions, make decisions, and interpret the world around us. Psychologists have studied this effect for decades. In one classic experiment, people were asked to test a simple rule about numbers. They were told that a sequence like 2, 4, 6 followed a rule and were asked to come up with their own examples. Most people guessed sequences like 8, 10, 12, or 20, 22, 24. They tried to confirm their guess instead of trying to disprove it. They rarely tested a pattern like 3, 7, 11, but the rule was simply any increasing numbers. Because they focused on confirming their idea rather than challenging it, they missed the real answer. This showed how people tend to test what they believe instead of checking whether they could be wrong. Confirmation bias appears in many areas of life. In politics, people often read news that supports their side and avoid sources that challenge it. A person who supports a candidate will focus on stories that praise them and ignore reports of failure or wrongdoing. Even when exposed to opposing facts, they may dismiss them or find ways to discredit the source. The goal is not always to find the truth. Often, it's to protect the belief. Social media makes this bias stronger. Algorithms show people content they like, which usually matches their beliefs. If someone clicks on an article that supports a certain opinion, they are more likely to see similar content. This creates an echo chamber. It feels like everyone agrees, even when that's not true. People may grow more certain and more extreme in their views because they never see serious challenges to them. In personal relationships, confirmation bias can affect how people judge each other. If you think someone is selfish, you'll notice every time they act in self-interest. You might ignore the times they help others. The belief shapes what you pay attention to. If you think your partner doesn't listen, you'll focus on the times they interrupt and overlook the times they are patient. Over time, this bias can damage trust. The person may not have changed, but your belief changes how you see them. In hiring, managers may form a quick opinion about a candidate based on one fact, like the school they attended or their first answer in an interview. They may then look for signs that confirm that first impression. If they think the person is smart, they will notice sharp answers and ignore weak ones. If they think the person is a poor fit, they will spot flaws more quickly. The same happens in performance reviews. A single bad moment may shape a manager's view, and from that point on, they only see evidence that fits that story. In science, confirmation bias is a risk that researchers try to avoid. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek, notice, and remember information that supports what we already believe, while ignoring or downplaying information that goes against our views. It's not always a conscious choice. Often, it happens automatically. The brain prefers agreement. It avoids conflict and discomfort. So it focuses on what fits and filters out what doesn't. This bias affects how we form opinions, make decisions, and interpret the world around us. Psychologists have studied this effect for decades. In one classic experiment, people were asked to test a simple rule about numbers. They were told that a sequence like 2, 4, 6 followed a rule and were asked to come up with their own examples. Most people guessed sequences like 8, 10, 12, or 20, 22, 24. They tried to confirm their guess instead of trying to disprove it. They rarely tested a pattern like 3, 7, 11, but the rule was simply any increasing numbers. Because they focused on confirming their idea rather than challenging it, they missed the real answer. This showed how people tend to test what they believe instead of checking whether they could be wrong. Confirmation bias appears in many areas of life. In politics, people often read news that supports their side and avoid sources that challenge it. A person who supports a candidate will focus on stories that praise them and ignore reports of failure or wrongdoing. Even when exposed to opposing facts, They may dismiss them or find ways to discredit the source. The goal is not always to find the truth. Often, it's to protect the belief. Social media makes this bias stronger. Algorithms show people content they like, which usually matches their beliefs. If someone clicks on an article that supports a certain opinion, they are more likely to see similar content. This creates an echo chamber. It feels like everyone agrees, even when that's not true. People may grow more certain and more extreme in their views because they never see serious challenges to them. In personal relationships, confirmation bias can affect how people judge each other. If you think someone is selfish, you'll notice every time they act in self-interest. You might ignore the times they help others. The belief shapes what you pay attention to. If you think your partner doesn't listen, you'll focus on the times they interrupt and overlook the times they are patient. Over time, this bias can damage trust. The person may not have changed, but your belief changes how you see them. In hiring, managers may form a quick opinion about a candidate based on one fact, like the school they attended or their first answer in an interview. They may then look for signs that confirm that first impression. If they think the person is smart, they will notice sharp answers and ignore weak ones. If they think the person is a poor fit, they will spot flaws more quickly. The same happens in performance reviews. A single bad moment may shape a manager's view, and from that point on, they only change. Blindness is a mental blind spot where people fail to notice large changes in their visual surroundings. These changes can be obvious when pointed out, yet the brain misses them completely in real time. This effect is not due to bad eyesight or poor memory. It comes from the way attention works. The brain does not process every detail it sees. Instead, it focuses on what seems important and ignores the rest. If a change happens outside that focus, the brain may miss it, even when it's right in front of the eyes. Psychologists have studied change blindness in many different ways. One famous experiment used a video where two people talked to each other at a counter. During the conversation, the person behind the counter ducked out of sight, and a different person popped up in their place. Most people didn't notice the swap. They continued talking as if nothing had changed. The difference in appearance, face, voice, even clothing, did not trigger a reaction. The person's attention was focused on the conversation, not on watching for a swap. Without that attention, the change went unseen. Another study used pictures that flashed back and forth with a blank screen in between. In each pair of pictures, something large had changed. A building vanished, a person's shirt turned a different color, or a car appeared out of nowhere. But many viewers could not find the change until they looked at the pictures side by side without interruption. The blank screen acted like a blink. It blocked the smooth transition, so the brain did not treat the second image as part of the first. As a result, it missed the difference. Change blindness proves that we don't see the world in full detail. We see what we expect, what we need, and what we're looking at directly. Everything else is filled in or ignored. The brain creates a sense of stability by assuming things stay the same unless proven otherwise. This is efficient. It helps us focus on tasks and avoid overload. But it also means we miss things we might expect to notice. The effect can happen in everyday situations. A person might not notice that a friend got a haircut, even if several inches are gone. Someone may walk into a familiar room and not see that a painting has been moved or replaced. A driver may fail to see that a road sign has changed. In each case, the change is clear, but only if the person is actively looking for it or thinking about it. Without that attention, the difference doesn't register. This bias also affects eyewitness testimony. A witness may feel sure they saw everything, but they may have missed a key detail. If something in the scene changed quickly, a person running in, a weapon appearing, a car pulling away, they may not remember it at all. They believe they saw it, but their brain filled in the gaps based on what seemed stable. In court, this can lead to false confidence and mistaken identity. Change blindness plays a role in safety and design. Pilots must monitor many instruments, but a change in one reading may go unnoticed if it happens slowly or without a strong signal. Surgeons may miss a shift in vital signs if they're focused on a technical step. In factories or control rooms, operators may not spot a warning light if the layout is crowded or if the change is small. To reduce these risks, designers use bright colors, flashing lights, or alarms to break through the blind spot and force attention to shift. The effect also shapes how people think about attention itself. Most people assume that if something is big or important, they will notice it. But studies show that size and importance don't matter unless attention is pointed at the change. That means people overestimate how much they see. They believe their visual field is detailed and complete. In reality, it's patchy and focused. Change blindness also links to the illusion of memory. People think they remember visual scenes with precision. They believe they can describe what someone was wearing, how a room looked, or what color a car was. But unless those things were important at the time, the memory may be vague or wrong. When a change occurs later, the mind may not even register that anything is different. Movies and television take advantage of this gap. Editors rely on the fact that viewers don't notice small changes between shots. A glass might move from one hand to another, a jacket might open or close, or an object might disappear from a table. These are called continuity errors. Viewers often miss them because their attention is focused on faces, dialogue, or action, not on background details. When they do notice, it can feel surprising, even funny, because it shows how much they overlooked. In real-world social settings, change blindness can affect how people interpret behavior. If someone's mood shifts subtly, if they go from calm to tense or distracted to upset, the change may go unnoticed until it becomes extreme. Friends or coworkers may only recognize something is wrong after a sudden outburst. Before that, the signs of change went unregistered because they were outside the focus of attention. One reason change blindness occurs is that the brain creates a mental model of the world. This model is based on what was seen a moment ago, not on a constant stream of visual updates. As long as nothing draws attention to a change, the brain sticks with the old model. That saves energy and helps keep focus, but it also means people see less than they think they do. The effect can be reduced through training and awareness. In fields like law enforcement, aviation, and medicine, professionals are taught to scan environments in a deliberate pattern. They practice noticing small changes and questioning their assumptions. This doesn't remove the bias completely, but it helps reduce its impact. In everyday life, people can pause and take a second look at familiar places, especially when making decisions or checking for risks. Knowing about change blindness can also improve how people communicate. Instead of assuming others saw what you saw, it helps to ask, "Did you notice this?" Or, "Did you see what just happened?" That opens the door to clearer understanding. It helps avoid blame when someone misses something important. It shows respect for how the mind works and how limited attention can be. Change blindness is not a flaw. It's a side effect of how attention and memory are built. The brain filters information to keep people focused and efficient. That filtering works most of the time, but it also means that big changes can slip by unnoticed. By understanding this effect, people can design better tools, build stronger habits, and stay open to the idea that what they missed might matter. Seeing is not just about what hits the eye, it's also about where the mind looks. The fundamental attribution error is a bias where people assume someone's behavior shows who they are rather than considering the situation they are in. When someone makes a mistake, acts rude, or falls behind, we often think it's because they're lazy, careless, or unfriendly. We don't stop to ask what might be happening in their life or what pressures they are facing. We connect actions to personality instead of to context. This error happens quickly and without much thought. It's easier to say, "She's always late because she's irresponsible," than to ask, "Does she have trouble with childcare or public transport?" It's simpler to think, "He's rude," than to think, "Maybe he's under stress." The brain prefers simple explanations. It jumps to conclusions based on what it sees. Behavior becomes a label, and that label sticks. Psychologists first noticed this pattern in the 1970s. In one study, people read essays written by students. Some essays supported a political view, and others opposed it. Participants were told that the writers had been assigned a position at random. Still, the readers judged the writers as if they believed what they wrote. They ignored the fact that the essay was a task, not a belief. This showed how people see action as character, even when they know the action came from outside pressure. The same bias shows up in everyday life. If a cashier snaps at you, you might assume they're rude. You don't think they may be tired after a long shift or dealing with a personal problem. If someone doesn't say hello, you may think they're stuck up, not that they didn't see you. The mind jumps to traits: rudeness, coldness, arrogance, without checking for reasons. This happens more often with strangers. When we don't know someone well, we fill in the gaps with guesses, and those guesses often focus on personality. If someone cuts in traffic, we call them a jerk. If we do the same, we excuse ourselves. We say, "I didn't see the sign," or "I'm running late for something important." This shows how we treat others differently than we treat ourselves. When we explain our own behavior, we usually point to the situation. "I was tired. I had no choice. That wasn't like me." But when we explain someone else's behavior, we focus on who we think they are. This creates a double standard. It makes us feel fair to ourselves and harsh toward others. It also means we stop asking questions. We don't look for context. We think we already understand. The fundamental attribution error affects how people see performance and failure. In school, a teacher might see a student who doesn't speak up and assume they're lazy or not interested. The teacher may not realize the student is anxious, distracted by problems at home, or afraid of making a mistake. In work settings, a manager might label an employee as unmotivated when they are actually overwhelmed or unclear on what's expected. The surface behavior is the same, but the cause is different. Without checking, people assume the worst. The error can affect how people view poverty, crime, and social issues. When someone is homeless, many assume they are lazy or addicted. They don't think about job loss, illness, lack of support, or rising housing costs. When someone commits a crime, people may blame bad morals and ignore poor education, community violence, or lack of opportunity. This makes it easy to blame and harder to solve problems. Culture plays a role too. In Western cultures, which often value individual responsibility, the error is stronger. People are taught to believe that everyone controls their own fate, so when something goes wrong, they blame the person. In other cultures, especially those that focus on community and context, people are more likely to consider the situation. They might ask what forces were involved or what pressures shaped the behavior. Media and storytelling also encourage the bias. Movies and shows often show people as good or bad, not as complex. A villain is evil by nature. A hero is brave and kind. Real life is messier. People act based on their environment, their stress, their needs. But when stories flatten character, viewers begin to expect the same in real life. The bias can also affect how we treat others over time. If we believe someone is rude, we treat them with caution or distance. They may respond with coldness or silence. We then see that as proof of their rudeness, when it might just be a reaction to how we acted. The bias shapes the story in our mind and makes it hard to see new evidence. First impressions become fixed. Labels harden into judgments. To reduce the fundamental attribution error, it helps to ask questions before assuming. What else might explain this? What pressure could they be under? It helps to slow down and reflect instead of reacting. When someone acts in a surprising way, instead of labeling, we can look for causes. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It just gives a fuller picture. It shows that actions have context, not just character. It also helps to think about how we want others to see us. If we want people to understand our tough days, our mistakes, or our silence, then we can offer that same space to others. We can remember that we all have moments that don't show who we are, and that others do too. In conflict, the bias can make things worse. Each person sees the other as the problem. You're always angry. You never listen. But if both sides think the other is flawed, no one looks at the situation. Maybe the stress is high, or the expectations are unclear. Maybe both people are acting from fear, not from their true selves. By focusing on character, the chance for resolution fades. In training and education, teaching people about the bias can change how they interact. Police officers, doctors, teachers, and managers all make fast judgments. If they learn to check their first impressions and ask about context, they make better choices. They respond with understanding instead of assumption. This leads to better outcomes and more trust. The fundamental attribution error is built into how people think. It simplifies the world, but it also distorts it. By seeing behavior as a reflection of identity, it hides the forces that shape choices. It makes people quicker to judge and slower to understand. When people pause to ask about the context, they see more. They stop blaming the person and start seeing the situation. And that shift leads to better thinking, better actions, and better relationships. Terror management theory explains how the fear of death influences human thoughts, feelings, and actions. At its core, this theory says that people manage their fear of mortality by holding tightly to cultural beliefs and values. These beliefs give life meaning and make people feel like they are part of something bigger and lasting. When this sense of meaning is threatened, especially by people with different beliefs, the fear of death returns, and people react in defensive, even aggressive ways. This idea came from the work of psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pisinski. They built on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker, who argued that much of human behavior is shaped by the need to deny death. Unlike animals, humans know they will die one day. This knowledge can be terrifying. To cope, people build systems, religions, nations, traditions that promise significance, order, and even symbolic immortality. These systems give people a sense that their lives matter. But the protection these systems offer is fragile. When something reminds people of death, they cling harder to their worldview. They defend their group and often attack others. Studies have shown this pattern many times. For example, when participants in a study are asked to think about their own death, even in a brief writing exercise, they become more likely to support harsh punishment for people who break laws or offend their moral views. They become more biased toward people outside their culture or religion. These reactions don't happen when they are asked to think about something neutral, like dental pain. It's the reminder of death that shifts their thinking. One experiment showed how even a small death reminder can change judgment. In the study, judges were asked to set a fine for a woman who was arrested for prostitution. Judges who had been reminded of death gave much harsher penalties than those who hadn't. The difference was striking. When faced with thoughts of mortality, the judges clung more tightly to the moral values of their society and punished those who broke its rules. This doesn't just happen in courtrooms. In politics, messages that trigger fear of death, such as terrorism or national threat, can make people more supportive of authoritarian leaders and strict policies. They want safety, order, and meaning. They become less tolerant of those who are different. They see opposing views not just as wrong, but as dangerous. This helps explain why political and religious divisions often grow wider in times of crisis. When people feel threatened, they turn inward. They protect their group. They blame outsiders. Religion often plays a key role in terror management. Many religious systems offer the promise of eternal life or lasting purpose. Believing in these systems can ease the fear of death. But when others reject those beliefs, it can feel like a threat, not just to the belief itself, but to the emotional safety it provides. As a result, people may become more hostile toward those with different faiths. They might see them as enemies, not because of what they do, but because of what they believe. The same logic applies to nationalism. Being part of a country, a flag, a culture, can offer a sense of symbolic immortality. People feel they will live on through their contributions to their nation or culture. If someone criticizes that culture or questions its values, it can feel like an attack on the meaning of life. That can lead to anger, exclusion, and even violence. The fear of death, often hidden beneath the surface, drives these strong reactions. Even in smaller ways, terror management shows up in daily life. When people feel unsure about their place in the world, they may become more judgmental. They may criticize others more, or try to prove their own value more loudly. Social media makes this easier. People post opinions, beliefs, and identities to affirm their worth. When others challenge them, the response can be swift and hostile. Behind the scenes, the brain is protecting itself from fear, not just from being wrong, but from being meaningless. This fear can even affect health behavior. Some studies show that when people are reminded of death, they make choices that reinforce their identity, even if those choices are unhealthy. A smoker who sees smoking as part of their self-image may become more defensive about it after thinking about mortality. Instead of quitting, they may deny the risks more strongly. The same can happen with eating habits, risky behavior, or even ignoring medical advice. When fear is high, identity feels more urgent than logic. Terror management theory doesn't mean people always act out when they think about death. It depends on how strong their beliefs are and how secure they feel. When people have a stable sense of meaning, they are less reactive. They don't feel as threatened by others. But when that sense is shaky, during times of loss, change, or crisis, they may respond more strongly. That's why moments of uncertainty can lead to spikes in extremism, prejudice, and moral panic. This theory also helps explain grief. When someone dies, the loss is not only emotional, it also challenges the belief that life has structure and meaning. People often respond by turning to ritual, tradition, or faith. They tell stories about the person who died, honor their memory, and look for ways to continue their legacy. These actions help restore a sense of meaning. They protect the living from falling into despair. Understanding terror management can help people be more aware of their own reactions. If someone feels intense anger at a different belief or way of life, it helps to ask, am I responding to a threat to my values or to a deeper fear? If we understand that fear of death is at work, we can respond more calmly. We can question our assumptions and give others the space to believe differently. That doesn't mean all views are equal or that we must accept harmful behavior, but it means we can separate fear from reason. This awareness also helps in conflict resolution. If two groups are clashing, it's not always about policy or facts. It may be about meaning and identity. Solutions that ignore this deeper layer may fail. But if people feel that their values are seen and respected, they may become more open to dialogue. They may feel less need to defend themselves with anger or blame. Terror management theory offers a clear view of how much fear shapes human life. It shows that people are not always rational. They don't always seek truth or fairness. Sometimes they seek safety, especially the kind that protects them from the thought of death. This is not a weakness, it's part of being human, but it can lead to division, judgment, and harm unless people learn to recognize it, name it, and work through it with care. The halo effect is a mental shortcut where one positive quality of a person shapes how we see everything else about them. If someone is attractive, we might assume they're also smart, kind, or trustworthy, even if we have no evidence for those traits. This judgment happens quickly and without much thought. The brain notices one good trait and fills in the blanks, creating a full picture that may not match reality. The term halo effect came from psychologist Edward Thorndike in the 1920s. He ran a study where military officers rated their soldiers on traits like intelligence, leadership, and appearance. Thorndike found that if a soldier was rated high on one quality, they were likely to get high scores on others too, even if those traits weren't actually connected. For example, a neat-looking soldier might be rated as smarter or more dependable just because they made a good first impression. This kind of bias shows up in many areas of life. In hiring, a job candidate who dresses well and speaks confidently may be seen as more capable, even if their experience or skills are average. In school, students who are liked by teachers may get better grades or more attention, simply because they are seen in a positive light. In courtrooms, juries may treat attractive defendants more gently, assuming their appearance reflects good character. This creates unfair advantages and disadvantages based on impressions, not facts. The halo effect often starts with physical appearance. Research shows that people tend to think good-looking individuals are also more honest, more talented, and more intelligent. This belief starts early. Studies with young children show that even they judge prettier faces as nicer or smarter. Over time, this belief becomes stronger. It affects how teachers grade, how bosses promote, and even how voters choose candidates. But looks are not the only trigger. The halo effect can come from any standout trait. A confident speaker may be seen as more credible, even if their message is weak. A celebrity who succeeds in one field may be assumed to have talent in others. An athlete may be asked for advice on business or politics simply because of their fame. These assumptions feel natural, but they are not based on evidence. They are mental leaps based on one bright spot. In the workplace, this bias can distort performance reviews. A manager who likes an employee's personality may overlook poor results. They may explain mistakes as exceptions rather than patterns. At the same time, another employee who seems distant or awkward may be judged harshly, even if their work is strong. This creates problems for fairness, morale, and decision-making. In relationships, the halo effect can shape first impressions. On a date, someone who tells a funny story may be seen as more thoughtful, even if they haven't shown that quality. A person who gives a small gift may be viewed as generous in general. These beliefs can last a long time. Once someone is seen as good, people tend to explain away their flaws. They say things like, "He didn't mean it," or "She's just having a bad day," because the positive image is hard to shake. The media also plays a role in spreading the halo effect. When someone becomes famous for one thing, they are often treated as experts in unrelated areas. A movie star might speak on health, or a CEO might be asked about education reform. Their opinions are taken seriously because of their success, but success in one field doesn't guarantee wisdom in another. Still, the glow of one trait spreads to others. This effect also shows up in branding and marketing. A company that makes a popular product may be seen as trustworthy in other areas. If people like one feature of a brand, like design or customer service, they may assume the whole company is better. This leads them to buy more, stay loyal, and defend the brand even when problems arise. Marketers use this bias by promoting one strong point and letting it shape the full image. The halo effect is powerful because it saves mental effort. The brain likes shortcuts. Instead of weighing each trait on its own, it uses one known fact to guess the rest. This works well when time is short or information is limited, but it causes mistakes when the guess turns into a firm belief. People end up trusting the wrong person, ignoring warning signs, or giving praise where it's not earned. The opposite of the halo effect is the horn effect. This happens when one negative trait colors everything else. If someone seems rude, A may also be seen as lazy or dishonest, even if those traits don't match. Both effects show how easy it is for a single impression to dominate judgment. To reduce the halo effect, people need to slow down and look at traits separately. In hiring, this means using structured interviews and rating systems that focus on specific skills. In teaching, it means grading work without knowing whose it is. In decision-making, it means asking, what is this person actually showing me? Instead of, what do I feel about them overall? Awareness helps. If you know the bias exists, you can catch yourself when your judgment feels too easy or too positive. You can ask others for feedback and compare notes. If someone seems perfect, it may help to pause and look for details that either support or challenge that view. The halo effect is not always wrong. Sometimes, a person with one strong trait really does have others. A confident speaker may also be intelligent and kind, but the key is not to assume. Each quality must be tested on its own. Otherwise, people are judged by a glow that might not belong to them. In the end, the halo effect reminds us that people are complex. One good trait does not mean perfection, just as one flaw does not mean failure. Fair judgment takes work. It means seeing each part clearly, without letting one shine too brightly and blind us to the rest. The illusory truth effect is the tendency to believe something is true just because we've heard it many times, even if it's false. Repetition increases familiarity. Familiarity feels comfortable, and comfort feels like truth. This pattern doesn't rely on facts or logic. It relies on how easily a statement comes to mind. If the brain processes a sentence smoothly, it mistakes that ease for accuracy. It's a mental shortcut, and it can mislead people without them realizing it. Psychologists first studied this effect in the 1970s. In one experiment, participants were shown a list of statements, some true, some false. Later, they rated how believable each one was. The researchers found that the more often a false statement appeared, the more people rated it as true. Even when the participants had been told it was false earlier, repetition still made it feel more trustworthy. The falsehood hadn't changed, but its familiarity had grown, and that was enough to shift belief. This effect happens because of how memory and attention work. The brain prefers things that are easy to understand and remember. When we see or hear something again, it feels easier to process. That mental fluency makes us feel more confident. We assume it must be true, not because we've checked it, but because it feels familiar. This is not a conscious choice. It happens quickly, without much effort. That's why people fall for it across all backgrounds and education levels. The illusory truth effect shows up in everyday life. In the news, if a false claim is repeated enough times, it can start to feel right. A politician might repeat a misleading statistic. A headline might exaggerate a story. If those claims appear again and again, on TV, on social media, in conversations, they start to sound normal. Over time, people forget where they heard it. They stop checking. The claim becomes part of their belief system, not because it's been proven, but because it's been repeated. This bias is especially strong when people are distracted or rushed. If someone sees a false claim while scrolling through their phone, they may not think much about it. But the exposure still matters. The brain files it away. Later, when they see it again, it feels familiar, and that familiarity feels like truth. The effect is even stronger when the repeated statement fits with what they already believe. That's when confirmation bias and the illusory truth effect work together. People hear what they want to hear and feel more sure about it every time. Marketing takes advantage of this tendency. Ads repeat slogans, claims, and product benefits over and over. Even if the claim is weak or vague, repetition builds trust. The message starts to feel natural, even obvious. A product that says America's favorite or proven effective may not back it up with hard evidence, but people believe it more the longer it's out there. That's the power of hearing the same thing again and again. The effect also affects how we remember facts. If a person hears the wrong version of a story several times, they may forget the real one. In classrooms, if a historical event is taught incorrectly but confidently, students may absorb the wrong version. Even if they later learn the truth, the earlier, repeated version can stick. It becomes harder to unlearn. The brain does not keep facts in separate files labeled true and false. It keeps what feels easy to recall. This can be dangerous when it comes to health and safety. A false belief about vaccines, diets, or treatments can spread through communities just because people keep repeating it. Once the claim becomes common, it starts to shape behavior. People share it with others, not to mislead, but because they believe it's true. And every time it's repeated, it gains strength. The harm grows not because of malice, but because of repetition. One way to fight the illusory truth effect is to stop repeating false claims, even when we're trying to correct them. Saying X is not true can still plant X in the listener's mind. Over time, they may forget the not and just remember X. That's why fact-checkers often reframe corrections. Instead of saying, "It's false that chocolate cures cancer," they say, "There's no evidence that chocolate cures cancer." This approach puts the focus on what's true, not just on denying what's false. It also helps to slow down and check sources. When a statement feels familiar, ask why. Is it something you learned from a reliable source, or just something you've seen often? If the claim fits too neatly with what you want to believe, pause and double-check. Ask where the information came from and whether it's been verified. Don't trust a claim just because it keeps showing up. In group settings, the effect spreads even faster. If several people in a meeting repeat a flawed idea, it can start to seem like a solid plan. No one wants to be the first to disagree, so the idea gains weight. It gets repeated more. Eventually, people forget to ask if it's even true or useful. It just becomes what we all think. This is how bad decisions grow in companies, schools, and governments. Even when people learn about the illusory truth effect, they are not immune to it. Knowing about the bias helps, but it doesn't erase the feeling of fluency that comes from repetition. That's why awareness must be paired with habit. Get used to asking, is this familiar because it's true, or just because I've seen it a lot? This small question creates space for better thinking. The illusory truth effect shows how easily the mind can be tricked, not by clever lies, but by repeated ones. The more often we hear a statement, the more we believe it, even without proof. This doesn't make people foolish, it makes them human. But in a world where repetition is easy and fast, it's important to slow down, ask questions, and stay alert. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, while falsehood repeats itself until it sounds right. False memory is the phenomenon where people remember events that never happened or remember real events differently from how they occurred. These memories often feel just as real and detailed as true ones. The person may have full confidence in the memory and may not realize it's inaccurate. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has done extensive research on this topic. Her studies show that memory is not like a video recording. It doesn't play back events exactly as they happened. Instead, memory is a reconstruction, a mix of actual events, imagination, suggestions from others, and beliefs. In one of Loftus's early studies, participants watched a video of a car crash. Later, they were asked questions about the scene. Some were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Others were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? That one word, smashed, led people to report higher speeds. It also made them more likely to say they saw broken glass, even though there was none. This showed that language can change memory. In another experiment, Loftus asked participants to read short stories about their childhood. 3 were real, based on information from their families. 1 was fake. It described getting lost in a shopping mall. Over time, many people remembered the false event. Some added vivid details, the color of the store, the feeling of panic, even a stranger helping them. These memories felt real to them, but the event never happened. This shows how easily memory can be shaped by suggestion. False memories don't just appear in labs. They happen in everyday life. A person might remember a conversation that didn't take place. They might believe they turned off the stove but didn't. They might recall a childhood event that was actually told to them by a family member. Over time, stories we hear, movies we watch, and dreams we have can blend with real memories. The brain does not always mark what came from direct experience. This can be harmless, like when siblings argue over who got in trouble for something years ago, but it can also be serious. In court cases, eyewitnesses sometimes give confident but false testimony. They may say they saw someone at a crime scene, even if that person wasn't there. They may be shown a lineup of faces and pick one, not because they remember, but because the face looks familiar. Once they choose, their mind builds a story around it. They grow more sure over time, even if they were unsure at first. Loftus has testified in many trials to explain how memory works. She has argued that people can be mistaken even when they feel certain. This is not lying. It's a normal mental process. Memory is shaped by attention, suggestion, time, and emotion. A traumatic or emotional event does not protect against false memory. In fact, high stress can make memory less accurate. The brain focuses on the most intense parts and may fill in gaps later with guesses. False memory can also happen in therapy. In the 1980s and 90s, some therapists used methods like guided imagery or hypnosis to help people recover hidden memories. Some patients began to recall abuse or other traumatic events that had no evidence. Families were torn apart. Many of these memories turned out to be false. The therapists didn't mean harm, but their techniques encouraged vivid imagination. Once the memory was formed, it felt real. Social media and the internet have also made false memory more common. A story shared many times can begin to feel like something we've always known. A fake image or edited video can plant a belief. Memes, tweets, and articles mix real and false information. When people see them again and again, the brain starts to treat them as facts. If a person sees a photo labeled with the wrong caption, they may later remember the caption and the image as one event, even if the photo was from a different context. False memories can also be shaped by group discussion. When people talk about a shared event, like a concert, a trip, or a crisis, they may influence each other. One person might say, "Remember when that guy tripped?" And others may nod, even if they didn't see it. Later, they might believe they did. Memory is social. It's affected by what others say, how we feel about the event, and what we expect to be true. The Mandela Effect is a modern term for shared false memories. It refers to when many people remember something the same way, but it turns out to be wrong. One example is people remembering the children's book as the Berenstain Bears, when it's actually the Berenstain Bears. Another is believing that a famous movie line was "Luke, I am your father," when the real line is "No, I am your father." These errors often spread through repetition. The wrong version is repeated so much that it becomes the dominant one in people's minds. False memories don't mean that the brain is broken. They show how flexible and creative it is. Memory is not stored in one place like a file. It is made up of pieces stored across the brain: sights, sounds, emotions, words. When we recall something, the brain puts these pieces together. If a few pieces are missing, it fills the gaps with guesses. This works well most of the time, but it also means the mind can create detailed memories of things that never happened. To reduce false memory, people can take steps to slow down and check facts. Writing things down soon after they happen helps keep the record accurate. In legal settings, police and lawyers are trained to avoid leading questions. Instead of asking, "Did you see the red car speed away?" they ask, "What did you see?" This avoids planting details that may not be true. In therapy, ethical guidelines stress that memories must not be suggested or forced. Being aware of false memory doesn't stop it completely. Even memory experts are not immune. but it helps people think more carefully about what they remember and how sure they are. Confidence does not always equal accuracy. Two people can remember the same event very differently and both feel they are right. This doesn't mean one is lying. It means memory is personal, selective, and vulnerable to change. Elizabeth Loftus's research has changed how we understand memory. It has shown that the mind can create rich, believable experiences out of nothing. It has reminded us that memory is not a perfect record, but a story we keep rewriting, sometimes with details that were never there. The bystander effect is a social psychology principle that shows how people are less likely to help someone in need when others are present. The presence of a crowd makes each individual feel less responsible. Everyone assumes someone else will step in. This effect can happen in emergencies, in daily life, and even online. It's not about people being cruel. It's about how responsibility feels shared, and when everyone shares it, no one feels it fully. This concept became widely known after the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York. Initial news reports claimed that dozens of people saw or heard parts of the attack, yet no one called the police until it was too late. Later studies showed the story was more complicated, but the case sparked research into how people behave in groups during emergencies. Psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley ran a series of experiments to understand this pattern. In one study, participants sat alone in a room and heard someone in another room cry out in distress, pretending to have a seizure. When participants believed they were the only one who could hear the emergency, most helped quickly. But when they believed others were also listening, fewer stepped in, and they waited longer. The more people they thought were present, the less likely they were to act. This effect is not limited to fake emergencies. It shows up in real-world situations too. Someone might fall in public, drop their belongings, or shout for help. If many people are nearby, each one tends to wait. They look at others to see what they are doing. If no one moves, the situation seems less urgent. This is called social proof. People use the group's behavior to judge what's appropriate. If others seem calm, they assume help isn't needed, even when it is. Diffusion of responsibility also plays a role. When a person sees an emergency alone, the choice is clear: act or don't. But in a group, the weight is spread out. Each person thinks someone else will help or someone else knows what to do. This delays action. Sometimes it prevents it entirely. The brain shifts from "I should do something" to "it's not my job." The effect can even happen in small groups. In one test, researchers staged a person fainting in a public place. When only one person saw it, they helped most of the time. When others were around, help dropped. Even with just 2 or 3 bystanders, the helping rate went down. This shows that it doesn't take a large crowd for the effect to kick in. Just the sense that others are available is enough. Cultural factors can shape how the bystander effect plays out. In some societies, people are more community-oriented. In others, personal space and privacy are valued. This can change how people view public help. In cultures that stress individualism, people may wait longer, assuming it's not their business. In places where group ties are stronger, someone might step in sooner. But the general pattern holds. As group size goes up, personal responsibility goes down. There are ways to counter this effect. One of the most powerful is direct action. If someone needs help and you're in a group, don't assume others will handle it. Act as if you're the only one responsible. If you can't help directly, you can still call for help or assign a task. In fact, studies show that when a bystander points to someone and says, "You, call an ambulance," people are far more likely to respond. The command gives them a role and removes the confusion. Training and awareness also help. In some professions, like emergency response, security, or healthcare, people are taught not to wait for others. They learn to take the lead even when others hesitate. These habits can spread to daily life. People who understand the bystander effect are more likely to break it. They know hesitation is common, and they push through it. They don't wait for someone else to do what they can do now. The bystander effect also appears online. If someone posts a cry for help, a warning, or a plea for support, others may scroll past. They may assume someone else has replied. On platforms where likes and views pile up quickly, people feel like part of a crowd. That same crowd effect can numb the sense of duty. But when someone speaks up, comments, messages, or shares, it often starts a chain reaction. Others follow. Action can be contagious, but someone must go first. There's also a risk that repeated exposure to emergencies can reduce urgency. If someone sees constant footage of accidents, violence, or disasters, they might feel overwhelmed or numb. They think, "There's nothing I can do." Or, "This happens all the time." This mindset adds another layer to the bystander effect. It's not just about others being around. It's about the belief that one person's actions don't matter. That belief needs to be challenged. People sometimes assume the bystander effect shows that others are cold or indifferent. But research suggests otherwise. Most people care. They feel concern, but concern doesn't always lead to action. Confusion, fear, and uncertainty get in the way. The situation may be unclear. They may worry about doing the wrong thing or being embarrassed. They may freeze. These are human responses, not failures of character. Education can change the outcome. Schools, workplaces, and communities can teach people how to respond in emergencies. They can show examples, practice role play, and explain what to do. When people know what to expect, they are more likely to help. When they know the bystander effect exists, they are more likely to resist it. Helping others is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as asking, "Do you need help?" or staying with someone until support arrives. These actions don't require expert skills. They require awareness, courage, and the willingness to act, even when others are watching. The bystander effect reveals a key truth about human behavior. People take cues from others. They look to the group to guide their choices, but the group isn't always right. Silence doesn't mean safety. Inaction doesn't mean nothing's wrong. When someone needs help, the question isn't, "Why isn't anyone helping?" It's, "What can I do?" And that shift in mindset makes all the difference. Maslow's hammer is the tendency to rely on a familiar tool or method for every problem, even when it's not the right fit. The phrase comes from psychologist Abraham Maslow, who once said, "I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail." The idea is simple. People get used to one way of solving problems, and they start using that same approach for everything. But not all problems are nails, and not every situation needs a hammer. This thinking pattern shows up in many fields. In medicine, a doctor trained heavily in surgery might recommend surgery more often, even when other treatments could work better. In education, a teacher who loves lectures may stick with that style, even if the students need hands-on learning. In business, a manager who's always relied on cutting costs might apply that tactic again and again, even when the real issue is low morale or poor leadership. In each case, the hammer is familiar, but the problem is different. This behavior happens because people feel comfortable with what they know. If a method worked in the past, it feels safe. It saves time and mental energy. Trying something new feels risky. There's a learning curve, a chance of failure, and a loss of control. So people go back to the tool that gave them results, even if it's the wrong one for the job. Sometimes this mindset is built into systems. A company might measure success only through profit. So every decision, hiring, marketing, product design, is judged by short-term financial results. The company might ignore customer satisfaction, team well-being, or long-term risk. The hammer becomes the single metric. Everything else gets flattened to fit it. In government, leaders may push the same policies over and over. A focus on law enforcement might be used to address addiction, poverty, or mental illness, issues that may need social services, not more policing. But if the system is built to use force, then every problem looks like something to control. This creates patterns of overreach, waste, or harm, not because of bad intent, but because the wrong tool keeps being used. Even in daily life, people fall into this trap. A parent might use discipline to solve every behavior issue, even when a child is confused or sad. A friend might give advice when someone just needs to be heard. A person who always works harder may respond to stress by pushing even more, when rest or delegation would help more. These habits come from good places: love, responsibility, drive. But the method doesn't always match the moment. Maslow's hammer becomes especially risky when combined with confidence. If someone believes strongly in their tool, they stop looking for other options. They ignore feedback. They see failure as proof that the tool wasn't used enough, not that it might be the wrong tool. A manager might double down on strict rules when the team resists, thinking discipline is the answer. A student might keep rereading notes instead of trying practice problems because that's what worked before. The more familiar the tool, the harder it is to let go. This mindset also blocks innovation. When people rely on the same methods, they stop exploring. They miss new ideas, tools, or perspectives. In science, this can limit discovery. A lab might use the same model or test year after year, missing signs that a new method could open better results. In art, it can stifle creativity. A designer who always uses the same colors or shapes may lose the spark that comes from trying something new. To avoid this trap, the first step is awareness. People need to ask, is this the right tool for this task? Not just, what's worked before? That small pause opens space for better thinking. It allows room for questions like, what kind of problem is this? What are its parts? What does it need? Those questions shift focus from the tool to the goal. Next is learning to hold tools loosely. Being skilled in one method is valuable, but flexibility matters more. A great leader knows when to give structure and when to give freedom. A great teacher knows when to explain and when to ask. A great problem solver doesn't fall in love with the tool. They fall in love with the process of solving. Another way to avoid Maslow's hammer is to work with others who use different tools. Diversity in a team isn't just about background or beliefs. It's also about thinking styles. A group that includes analysts, creatives, skeptics, and planners will spot blind spots faster. One person's hammer might be another person's wrench. Together, they see the whole toolbox. Curiosity is also a key. People who keep learning, questioning, and exploring are less likely to get stuck. They're open to trying new approaches, even if they feel clumsy at first. They ask, what if we tried this? They're willing to fail and learn. That mindset turns a narrow path into a wide one. Maslow's hammer is not a flaw. It's a habit. It's the brain trying to save energy by repeating what worked. But good habits need review. A chef doesn't use a knife for soup. A mechanic doesn't use a wrench for wiring. The right tool makes the work cleaner, faster, and safer. The wrong tool adds effort, confusion, and risk. In the end, solving problems well means using the right method at the right time. That takes awareness, humility, and care. It means letting go of pride in the tool and focusing on the task. It means seeing the world as it is, not just as it fits what we already know. When people stay curious, open, and adaptable, they build a toolbox, not just a hammer. And that makes all the difference. Social loafing is the tendency for people to put in less effort when working in a group than they would if they were working alone. It doesn't always happen on purpose. Often, people don't even realize they are doing it. The effect shows up in classrooms, offices, sports teams, and anywhere group work happens. When responsibility is shared, effort often drops. People feel less pressure to perform. They think someone else will carry the weight, or that their individual effort won't make a big difference. The concept was first studied in the late 1800s by French researcher Max Ringelmann. He observed that when people pulled on a rope in teams, The total force was less than the sum of each person's effort when they pulled alone. He found that as the group size grew, the average effort per person went down. This pattern was later named social loafing. One reason for social loafing is a sense of anonymity. In a group, it's harder to track who did what. If no one is watching closely, people feel they can do less without being noticed. In solo work, success or failure is tied directly to the individual. But in a team, the lines blur. If a group does well, everyone gets credit. If it fails, the blame is shared. This makes it tempting to coast. Another reason is the belief that one's contribution is not needed. In large teams, especially, people may feel like a small piece of a big machine. They think, even if I slack off, the project will still get done. This belief leads to disengagement. Instead of putting in full effort, they do just enough to blend in. They trust the group will make up for it. Social loafing can also happen when the task is not interesting or clear. If people don't feel personally invested, they won't push themselves. If goals are vague, they may not know what's expected. In this fog, it's easier to hold back. They might not feel lazy. They might just feel unsure. And uncertainty often leads to inaction. Group size matters too. The larger the group, the more likely people are to loaf. With 2 or 3 people, each person feels more visible. Their absence or silence stands out. With 10 or 20, it's easier to fade into the background. One person missing a step in a dance performance is obvious. One person doing less in a massive project may go unnoticed. Social loafing can hurt group performance. Projects may take longer, ideas may be weaker, and tensions may rise. When some people don't pull their weight, others have to do more. This can lead to frustration and burnout. Those who work hard may feel resentful. They might stop trying too. Then the whole group slows down. This effect also affects creativity and risk-taking. If people don't feel ownership, they are less likely to suggest bold ideas. They may avoid speaking up. They might assume someone else will do the thinking. Over time, the group becomes passive. It completes tasks but doesn't innovate. Social loafing can show up in classrooms during group assignments. Students might divide tasks unevenly. One person writes most of the report. Another just signs their name. The teacher sees one project but doesn't see the unequal effort behind it. Unless effort is tracked, loafing stays hidden. In workplaces, the effect can show up in meetings, team projects, or shared goals. A team may agree to launch a new product, but not everyone follows through. Some miss deadlines or skip details, assuming others will cover for them. When teams lack strong leadership or clear roles, loafing grows. Digital environments can make this worse. In remote teams or online classes, it's easier to disappear. If there's no face-to-face contact, people feel less pressure to show up. A person might be in the video call, but not really present. Without clear systems for accountability, effort slips. But social loafing is not unavoidable. Certain conditions can reduce it. One way is to make individual contributions visible. If each person's work is tracked and recognized, they are more likely to try hard. Public feedback, peer reviews, or shared progress boards help. When effort is seen, effort grows. Another strategy is to give people ownership. When someone feels a task is theirs, they care more. If they choose the role or task themselves, they are more likely to follow through. Clear roles and goals also help. When people know what they're responsible for, they are less likely to hide. Smaller group sizes can also reduce loafing. In a team of 3, each person matters more. There is less room to blend in. The lines of effort and credit are clearer. A mix of individual and group goals works best. People need to feel like their personal effort connects to the group's success. Building team spirit helps too. When people feel loyalty or connection to their group, they work harder. Trust and respect matter. If team members like and rely on each other, they are less likely to let the group down. Group norms can shape behavior. If the culture expects full effort, people usually rise to it. Leaders play a key role. A good leader notices patterns, gives feedback, and sets clear expectations. They reward effort and hold people accountable. They ask questions like, "What did you contribute?" or "What's your next step?" This keeps people focused. It reminds them that their work matters. Technology can help when used well. Tools that track progress, share updates, and divide tasks make effort more visible. But tools alone are not enough. The culture around the tools matters more. If the team values visibility and effort, the tools support it. If not, the tools just become noise. Social loafing is not a sign that people are lazy. It's a response to unclear roles, lack of accountability, and weak group structure. With the right setup, people work hard, even in groups. The key is to make effort matter. When people know they are seen, valued, and needed, they show up fully. They move from passive to active, from hiding to leading, from loafing to owning. Emotional truth is the sense that something feels true, even if the facts say otherwise. It is based on feelings, not evidence. Actual truth is based on what can be verified, measured, or observed. Both can exist at the same time, but they do not always agree. When they conflict, emotional truth often wins in the mind. People believe what feels true to them, even if it is false. This shapes memory, decision-making, and how people relate to others. The mind relies on emotion to make sense of the world. Emotions give quick judgments about safety, trust, and meaning. These judgments are fast and strong. They help people act quickly, but they are not always accurate. A person might feel that someone is untrustworthy because they remind them of a bad experience. That feeling becomes a truth in their mind, even if the person has done nothing wrong. In relationships, emotional truth often shapes how people see the past. One person might feel hurt in an argument and say, "You never support me." The other might respond with facts. "I helped you last week and the week before." But the emotional truth is stronger. The hurt person feels unsupported. The facts do not erase the feeling. If both people keep arguing from their own truth, they talk past each other. Each feels unheard. This gap between feeling and fact appears in memory too. People remember how they felt more clearly than what was said or done. After a stressful event, someone might recall that everyone was against them, even if only one person criticized them. The feeling of isolation shapes the memory. It becomes their version of the truth, and it feels real. In larger groups, emotional truth can shape public opinion. A rumor that plays on fear can spread faster than a well-researched report. If a story feels true because it matches someone's experience, fear, or identity, it gains power. People share it, believe it, and act on it. Facts may not stop it. When a politician or influencer repeats an emotionally charged claim, it can stick, even if proven false. Emotional truth bypasses logic. This also happens in news and media. A headline that sparks outrage or fear gets more attention. People click, share, and comment. The headline becomes the truth they carry, even if the full story is more complex or different. A photo out of context can feel more true than a long article. A slogan can feel more real than a full report. Emotional truth spreads faster and deeper than actual truth, especially when emotions are high. In therapy, emotional truth must be respected, even when it does not match the facts. A person might say, "I was a bad child," based on years of criticism or neglect. The therapist may know this isn't factually true, but to the person, it feels true. That belief shapes their behavior, self-image, and choices. If the therapist only corrects the facts, the client may feel dismissed. Real change begins when emotional truth is understood and then gently compared to the actual truth. This does not mean emotional truth is always wrong or bad. Emotions are real. They guide people through relationships and values. If someone feels unsafe in a certain place, that feeling may protect them, even if the place has no record of danger. If a child feels unloved because their parent is distant, that feeling shapes how they grow, regardless of the parent's intent. Emotional truth matters because it drives behavior. But problems arise when emotional truth is mistaken for fact in every case. It can lead to poor decisions, broken trust, and misjudged people. A manager might reject a good idea because it feels too risky. A person might avoid a friend because they misread a look or a tone. A community might resist change because it feels like a threat, even if it brings long-term benefit. One way to balance emotional and actual truth is to name both. A person can say, "I know the facts say X, but I feel Y." This opens space for clarity. It respects both emotion and reality. Another way is to ask, "What's the story I'm telling myself?" This helps spot where feelings have filled in the gaps. Sometimes the emotional story is helpful. Sometimes it needs to be updated. In conflict, emotional truth often drives the fight. People want to feel seen and understood more than they want to be corrected. If someone says, "You made me feel small," it does not help to respond, "That's not true." It helps to ask, "What made you feel that way?" When emotional truth is heard, defenses go down. Then facts can be shared without blame. In learning, emotional truth can block growth. A student who believes they are bad at math may avoid trying, even if their scores say otherwise. The belief feels true. It becomes part of their identity. Encouragement alone won't change it. They need new experiences that build both skill and feeling. Only then can emotional truth shift. Marketing also uses emotional truth. Ads focus on how a product makes someone feel: powerful, loved, free. These feelings sell more than technical facts. A phone ad might not list features. It shows a parent capturing a child's first steps. That image creates an emotional truth. This phone connects you to what matters. Even if other phones have better specs, the feeling sells. The gap between emotional and actual truth can also show up in self-talk. A person might think, "I always mess things up." That may not be true, but the feeling of failure shapes their choices. They hesitate, avoid risks, or speak harshly to themselves. The brain listens to those thoughts and acts on them. Challenging them means looking for real evidence, not just strong feelings. Bringing emotional truth and actual truth together takes effort. It means listening without jumping to correction. It means checking assumptions without shame. It means asking, "Is this how it feels, or is this how it is?" It means respecting the role emotions play while not letting them run unchecked. This balance leads to better decisions, deeper empathy, and clearer thinking. Emotional truth shapes how people move through the world. It colors memory, influences belief, and drives action. But actual truth still matters. Without it, decisions become unstable. The goal is not to erase feeling, but to use it as a signal, not a final answer. When people notice the gap between what feels true and what is true, they can make better choices. They can slow down, check facts, and grow.